I'll never forget the day I first walked into that cramped house. The rent was cheap. The neighborhood looked quiet. I was sure I was getting a great deal. I had no idea what was waiting inside. I remember stepping across the threshold and smelling something damp. It wasn't strong enough to make me gag, but it never left my nose that first week. I figured it was just an old place that needed some airing out. My co-worker, Mark, moved in with me a few days later. We planned on splitting everything and turning the basement into either a small workout area or a place to store our fishing gear. It seemed like a solid plan. At first, the house itself had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a basic living room connected to a tiny kitchen. The previous owner left a few pieces of cheap furniture, but otherwise the place felt barren. It didn't bother me. I don't have a lot of stuff, and Mark doesn't either. The basement, though, was a different story. When I opened the creaky basement door for the first time, I saw stacks of old boxes piled in every corner. Dust coated everything. The light switch at the top of the stairs made the overhead bulb flicker. It gave me a brief look at the mess below. I remember sniffling from the musty odor and thinking, this is going to take a full weekend to clean. We didn't touch the basement for the first week. Mark and I both had a busy schedule at work, so we let it stay as it was. We only used it once in a while to grab a box of random tools I brought from my old apartment. We had a small leak in the kitchen sink and I needed a wrench. That was the first time I noticed something off. I had placed the wrench on top of a wooden crate near the foot of the stairs. I remember this because there wasn't much free space, and that spot seemed convenient. 10 minutes later, the wrench was gone. I thought I had misplaced it. I searched the area, lifting boxes, moving old newspapers aside. Nothing. Mark showed up behind me, asked what I was doing, and I told him. He said he hadn't touched it. We left it at that. I eventually found that wrench across the room, lying on a stack of rotted cardboard. I frowned, thinking maybe I tossed it there without realizing. Mark said, "You're probably tired. Don't worry about it." I wanted to accept that explanation, but something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that the wrench had been moved deliberately. I brushed it off as me being careless. A few nights later, Mark and I decided to start clearing out the basement. We wanted to see what was stored in those boxes and figure out how much space we had to make a little workout corner. We got home from the office around 7. We ate a quick dinner and headed downstairs. The overhead bulb kept flickering. Mark tried the switch a few times. It would turn off on its own, then turn back on. The flickering seemed almost rhythmic. I thought it might be a loose wire. We dug into the first couple of boxes. Old magazines, moldy clothes, random junk that looked like it came from yard sales. We kept coughing and waving away dust particles floating in the weak light. Mark stood up at one point to flip the switch off and on again, hoping to fix the flicker. It didn't change much. That's when I felt a prickling on the back of my neck. My heart thumped a little harder. I looked over my shoulder and stared at the corner behind us. I couldn't see anything moving, but the darkness there felt heavy. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but my chest tightened. I stood up, turned around, and took a couple of steps in that direction. The only sound was Mark shifting stuff around in a big cardboard box. I breathed in and tried to steady myself. I saw nothing unusual, so I went back to help Mark. We worked for about an hour. By then, we had made a small pile of trash and set aside a few tools that might still be usable. Mark picked up a small hammer that looked ancient. He joked that we could hang it on the wall as a relic. He set it down on top of a box behind him, then moved to open another crate. About 10 minutes later, he asked me, "Where's that old hammer?" I didn't know. We both looked around. It was gone. We found it 3 boxes over on top of some dirty towels. Mark stared at me. "You're messing with me, right?" I told him, "I swear I didn't touch it." He shrugged, but I saw a hint of worry on his face. I felt the same thing. We decided to call it a night. The next day I had trouble focusing at work. I kept thinking about that hammer. Part of me believed Mark was playing a prank on me, but he didn't seem like he was joking around. We've known each other for a couple of years, and that kind of prank isn't his style. I tried to push it out of my mind. When we got home, I asked if he wanted to do more basement cleaning. He shook his head and said, "Not tonight, man. Let's just relax." He looked stressed. I agreed. 2 days later, we had a light workload, so we got home around 5 in the afternoon. We decided to keep going with our basement project. The flickering light switch gave us the same trouble. Mark took a screwdriver and tried to tighten the wall plate. It made no difference. The overhead light sometimes stayed on, sometimes turned off, sometimes blinked in short pulses. It was annoying enough that we ended up using a small lamp plugged into an old outlet in the corner. The lamp gave us a steadier glow, but it didn't cover the whole space. The basement was warmer than usual that evening, probably because it had been a hot day. I felt sweat trickling down my neck. Mark pulled his phone out to check messages at one point and used the flashlight to look deeper into a box filled with what seemed like old fishing tackle. Hooks, lines, lures, that kind of stuff. That's when I heard a rustle against the far wall. It sounded like someone shifting feet on the concrete floor. I froze. Mark noticed me tensing up. He whispered, "What?" I whispered back, "I heard something." He turned his phone flashlight in that direction. We both stared. Nothing moved, but the shadows looked deeper than before. We moved carefully across the room, stepping around boxes, trying not to trip on anything. Mark held his phone up, shining it against the wall. I followed right behind him. The corner was empty, aside from a pile of old newspapers and some broken chair legs. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Mark exhaled and said, "Might be a rat or something." I nodded, but felt uneasy. We went back to sorting through the tackle box, though neither of us spoke much for the rest of the evening. That night, around 11, we were watching TV in the living room. We heard a dull thump from downstairs. It wasn't super loud, but it sounded like something fell over. Mark looked at me and said, "You heard that too?" I nodded, and we both got up. We grabbed our phones for light because we didn't trust the basement bulb at that point. When we opened the basement door, we noticed a faint smell of earth, like damp soil. We walked down the stairs carefully, each step creaking. About halfway down, I tried the light switch. It flickered weakly, then went dark. I said, "Hold your phone up." When we reached the bottom, Mark swung his phone's flashlight around. I heard him suck in a quick breath. He stood still, pointing his phone at the far wall. I looked over his shoulder and saw a shape that seemed to move along the concrete. It looked like a person's shadow sliding across the wall. My pulse raced and my scalp felt tight. Mark shone the flashlight directly at it, but there was nothing. The shape disappeared. There was no one else in the basement. We both started breathing harder. Mark said, "Did you see that?" I nodded. We looked around, checking every corner. All the boxes were in the same place. Nothing had fallen, but that corner with the newspapers looked more scattered. Some of the pages were spread out on the floor, like someone had kicked them. We didn't find footprints or anything else. After a minute or so, we decided we had enough. We went back upstairs and locked the basement door. The next morning, we talked about it. We went through possibilities. Maybe light from outside came in through a basement window and cast a weird shadow. But we remembered there was no external light at that side of the basement. It's covered by a big patch of weeds outside, and the tiny window there is filthy. We told ourselves it could be some strange reflection, or maybe our minds playing tricks. We weren't satisfied with any explanation. Over the next week, I tried to ignore the urge to go downstairs. I'd grab a tool or something, then hurry back up. Mark did the same. We started hearing subtle noises at night. Creaks, rustling, faint thumps. It was never loud enough to call the police or anything, but it was frequent. One evening, around 9, Mark was doing laundry in the basement. He came rushing up, out of breath. He said the light switch started turning off and on by itself. At first he thought it was loose wiring, but it felt too regular, almost like a pattern. He left the laundry unfinished. We finally decided to tackle the problem head on. It was a Saturday morning. We grabbed flashlights, a better lamp, and a roll of plastic sheeting to cover anything we didn't want dust on. We went down there, determined to clean everything out in one go. We spent about 3 hours sorting everything into piles: trash, donate, tools to keep, fishing gear, and random house supplies. The flickering overhead light annoyed us the entire time. The switch would sometimes click without us touching it. We kept hearing small noises behind us. Every time we looked, nothing was there. My nerves were shot by noon. My hands were shaky and I was drenched in sweat. Mark looked pale and he kept rubbing his forehead. Around midday, we took a break. We left the basement door open, went to the kitchen, and drank some water. I recall saying, "I feel like someone's in there with us." Mark nodded. "Yeah, I keep getting this feeling like there's a person standing right behind me." We gathered our nerves and returned to finish up. That's when we lost the screwdriver set. We had used it to remove some old shelf brackets from the wall. Mark set it on top of a closed box. 2 minutes later, the entire set vanished. We searched the entire basement. After almost 10 minutes of frantic searching, we found the screwdriver set lying on a shelf near the corner. Neither of us put it there. Mark picked it up slowly, like it might burn him. He didn't say a word. I just stood there, mouth dry, heart pounding. We hauled most of the junk outside for trash pickup. The heavier stuff we pushed to the side to deal with later. By early afternoon, the basement was mostly empty. The weird sensations never stopped, though. I felt like someone was watching me from the darkest corners. Every noise made me jump. Mark kept glancing around, biting his lip. We left the basement and locked the door once more, deciding we'd talk about the next step later. That night I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind kept going back to that shadow on the wall. I could still picture how it moved. I had never seen anything like that. Mark's reaction proved to me I wasn't imagining it. There was something in that basement. I didn't know if it was a person hiding, some electrical phenomenon, or something else I couldn't name. I just knew I was on edge, and I hated feeling that way in my own home. We agreed to call an electrician. A guy came out a few days later. He replaced the old switch and checked the wiring in the basement. He said it was a little outdated, but not dangerously so. When we mentioned the switch turning off by itself, he said it could be a worn contact. He didn't see any sign of that, though. He shrugged and said, "Call me if it happens again." After he left, the flickering seemed less frequent, but the uneasy feeling remained. Tools still disappeared and showed up in strange places. Sometimes I'd hear Mark in the next room let out a nervous laugh or curse under his breath when he couldn't find his stuff. We started keeping all our tools locked in a plastic container with a lid. Yet even that container would sometimes be found with the lid undone, the tools inside shuffled around. One evening, I was in the living room, scrolling through my phone. Mark came up from the basement, looking shaken. He had gone down to grab his fishing rod. I asked him what happened. He said he turned the corner and saw a shape standing near the far wall. He pointed his phone flashlight, and there was nobody there, but he swore he saw a figure for half a second. He described it as a dark form about his height that seemed to blend into the shadows. He stood there, shining his light for a solid minute, feeling his heart race. He searched the entire basement, but it was empty. The rod was lying on the floor, not on the shelf where he had left it. I believed him. There was no reason for him to lie. The atmosphere in the house changed. We both avoided the basement unless we really needed something. We talked about breaking the lease, but money was tight. The landlord was an older guy who seemed nice enough. We told him about the flickering light, but we didn't mention the other stuff. We didn't want him to think we were crazy. He said the house had been sitting empty for a year before we moved in. He claimed there were no known electrical problems beyond the usual old wiring. Mark and I decided to deal with it. We moved all important items out of the basement so we'd have fewer reasons to go down there. That left the space mostly empty, except for some heavy junk we couldn't move alone. The weird events continued in small ways. We'd occasionally hear odd sounds late at night, but they never got louder. We'd sometimes find small objects out of place. The switch still acted up, but less often. It felt like whatever was in that basement was letting us know it was still there, but it wasn't pushing us out. We've been living here a few months now. We try to keep our focus on work and everyday tasks. Sometimes late at night I feel something watching me. I don't see a face or a form, but the hair on my arms stands up, and I get goosebumps. Mark and I aren't sure what to do. We've considered talking to someone who knows about houses with these problems, but we haven't. For now, we're just getting by, trying not to think too hard about it. I still remember that first day stepping in, excited about having a place with a basement I could use for my workouts or my fishing gear. Now, I avoid going down there alone. I keep telling myself it's all in my head, or it's just old wiring and my imagination. But when I think about that wrench, that hammer, those screwdriver sets, and that moment Mark and I saw that shadow move along the wall, my stomach tightens. I don't have a neat explanation. It feels real. And every night, when I turn off the lights upstairs, I wonder if the basement light is staying off or if it's flickering away down there, sending signals to whatever might be lurking in the darkness. I don't stay up to check anymore. It's easier to pretend I don't see the faint glow under the basement door. It's easier to just go to bed and hope I don't hear any more noises. That's our daily life now, and I hate to admit it, but we're both hanging on, day by day, wondering what else might happen. I moved into this condo complex without any big expectations. I saw a low price, a decent floor plan, and a convenient location. I didn't care that the building went up in a rush or that the area used to be a rundown stretch of empty lots. For me, it was an upgrade. I never thought I'd end up questioning my own senses here. But now I spend my nights double-checking every corner, trying to figure out what's real and what might be in my head. This place is new, yet something about it feels wrong. I didn't believe in strange stories before, but I'm not sure anymore. I first noticed the weirdness the week after I moved in. Everything was a mess of unpacked boxes and plastic wrap. I was setting up my living room furniture. The condo smelled like fresh paint and drywall dust. The floors creaked when I walked, which I assumed was normal for new construction. Then an older guy from down the hall stopped by. He introduced himself as Mr. Santos. He was friendly enough with a shaky voice. He made an offhand comment that stuck with me. He said, "You know, they used to burn stuff here before all this went up." I asked him what he meant. He shrugged and said there used to be a lab nearby that burned whatever waste they had. Then he excused himself and left. He didn't give me any more details. I stood there for a minute, holding a couch cushion in my arms, feeling a little uneasy. I shrugged it off. I figured it was just local rumors. The next few nights were calm. I spent my time unpacking and watching TV on a temporary stand. I met a few other neighbors in the hallway, made small talk about the building's amenities, and tried to settle in. During my first weekend, I started hearing these faint sounds in my bedroom. I woke up one night at around 2 a.m. I thought I heard something under the floor. It was like a hollow knock, but it wasn't steady. I lay there, my heart pounding. The bedroom was dark, and the only light came from the digital clock on my nightstand. I held my breath and listened. I heard it again, kind of a dull thud. It came in pairs. Then it stopped. I didn't have a clue what it was. Could have been the pipes or the air ducts. I forced myself to go back to sleep, telling myself I was overreacting. The next day, I checked under the bed, tapped on the floor, and even opened the small access panels in the utility closet. I didn't see anything off. The floor looked solid, concrete topped with laminate. No sign of damage or gaps, so I ignored it. Construction noise can come from anywhere, I told myself. Probably the building settling or some leftover vibrations. A few days later, I heard something else. My walls started making a series of clicks and bangs, almost like someone was hitting a pipe in a rhythm. It was the middle of the night again. I rolled over in bed, feeling a twist in my stomach. The sound was faint but repeated. It followed a pattern. 2 taps, a pause, 1 tap, a pause, 3 taps. It wasn't random. I just lay there blinking in the darkness. My breathing got shallow. I tried to tell myself it was just water running through the plumbing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was doing it on purpose. In the morning, I took a quick walk around the building to see if any maintenance workers were around. I bumped into the super, a guy named Daniel. I asked him if there was any scheduled work happening at night. He said no. I asked if there might be issues with the pipes. He said maybe the water pressure was off, but nothing major had been reported. I didn't push the matter. He seemed busy, and I felt silly. Later that week, something else happened that rattled me more than the noises. I was in bed trying to fall asleep with my phone on the nightstand. It was about 1 in the morning. Out of nowhere, my phone's music app turned on at full volume. It blasted a harsh, static-like sound. I jumped up, grabbed my phone, and fumbled to mute it. My heart was hammering in my chest. My hands were clammy. When I unlocked the phone, the screen showed a track title I'd never seen. The audio was scratchy, like a radio stuck between stations. I went to my library and found nothing. No record of that track. No recently played list. Nothing. I felt a chill on my arms. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe I had downloaded a weird file by accident. Maybe it was an ad or some glitch. But the sound had a distorted quality I'd never heard before. It wasn't music. More like an old recording of static with brief moments of popping noises. After it happened, I stayed awake for hours flipping through my phone settings, checking if any unknown app was running. I didn't see anything suspicious. The next morning, my head felt heavy, and I had circles under my eyes. I went downstairs to get coffee from the lobby. On the way, I saw Mr. Santos again. He was sorting mail. I asked him if he ever heard strange noises at night. He kind of laughed under his breath and said, "This place was built too fast. These walls hide all kinds of stuff." Then he winked and told me to take care. The following evening, the tapping started at around the same time, a few minutes after midnight. It was the same pattern of knocks and pauses. My shoulders tensed up. I actually got out of bed and pressed my ear to the wall. The surface felt cool and I could hear faint scraping. Then the pattern stopped. My bathroom door creaked from the slight airflow in the apartment, and I almost jumped. That's how on edge I was. I decided to walk out into the hallway. I put on a sweatshirt and slippers, grabbed my phone, and left my unit. The corridor was quiet. The lights were dimmed. I walked toward the far end to see if any neighbor was awake. All the doors were closed and no sounds came from behind them. I didn't want to be the weird guy banging on doors to ask if they heard tapping, so I just walked back and forth for a minute. I noticed a subtle draft near the floorboards by my unit door. The building might not have been sealed well. That could explain some things, I thought, or at least that's what I wanted to believe. The next day, the super sent out a notice that some residents were complaining about minor leaks in their bathrooms, so he asked people to pay attention and report any issues. I figured that might be tied to the odd sounds in the pipes, but I also remembered that Mr. Santos told me about the place being a burn site for a lab. Something about that detail bugged me. I opened a map on my computer and searched for any historical mention of industrial sites in the region. I found a few references to a pharmaceutical facility that operated nearby decades ago, but nothing specific about incineration. The official records were vague. Time passed, and the noises continued. Every few nights, I'd wake up to those floor knocks or that rhythmic pipe tapping. Sometimes it was so faint that I questioned whether I was actually hearing it or dreaming it. My phone never did that static blast again, but there were other small glitches. One night, my flashlight app turned on by itself, lighting up the dark bedroom. Another time, my screen brightness maxed out without me touching anything. It might have been a software bug, but after the weird audio incident, every glitch felt sinister. I started to feel anxious. My chest tightened when the sun went down. I checked the clock, noticing the time creeping toward midnight, bracing for that tapping. I tried leaving a fan on to mask the noise, but I could still hear it. My sleep got worse. My appetite dropped. I spent more time staring at the walls, listening for the next odd sound. When the tapping finally came each night, my breath would catch in my throat. I'd just lie there, rigid, waiting for it to end. One Sunday afternoon, I went to the parking garage to organize my storage unit. That's a small concrete space near my car. It was dimly lit, and the overhead lights buzzed. As I rummaged through boxes, I heard a dripping sound against the concrete wall. I looked around and spotted a small wet patch. When I got closer, I smelled something chemical. It didn't smell like typical water seepage. It was a sharp, acrid odor. I knelt down to touch the liquid. It felt oily, and it clung to my fingers. I wiped them on a rag and backed away. I wasn't about to start messing with suspicious chemicals. I reported the leak to the super. He said he'd look into it, but from his expression, he either thought I was paranoid or that it was nothing more than runoff from a car. I tried to push the incident out of my mind. Over the next couple of weeks, I noticed that the tapping in my pipes became more sporadic. It didn't happen every night. But sometimes I'd catch a single knock that felt like a reminder. The floor thumping in my bedroom also seemed less frequent, but it still jolted me awake whenever it happened. I almost preferred the nightly consistency. The randomness messed with my head. At some point, I decided to confront Mr. Santos. I saw him taking out his trash one morning, and I approached him calmly. I said, "Look, can we talk about what you told me before, about stuff being burned here?" He shrugged and said there used to be all kinds of rumors, something about a lab disposing of chemicals or experimental materials. He didn't know details. He admitted he'd overheard it from other locals years ago. Then he said he never had any weird experiences until they built this complex. He did mention that once in a while he smelled strange odors in his bathroom. But that was it. No more specifics. That evening, I made dinner and tried to relax with a show on my TV. I finished eating, cleaned up, and got ready for bed. Right before midnight, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown caller with no number showing. I felt my stomach tighten. I answered, expecting it to be a robocall, but I only heard faint static, then a weird clicking noise, almost like the rhythmic tapping from my pipes. My arm hair stood up. I said, "Hello?" a couple of times, but got no response. Then the line went dead. I put my phone down and felt my pulse pounding in my temples. That night, I could barely sleep. No tapping came from the pipes, but I kept expecting it. I lay awake for hours, my mind going over every noise I'd heard in this building. The floor knocks, the weird phone audio, the oily leak in the garage. My body felt jittery and I was sweating despite the air conditioning. I closed my eyes, but every little creak made my heart race. A few days later, I decided to talk to the super again. I asked him if there was any chance the building's structure had pockets of air or leftover debris that could cause the knocking sounds. He shrugged and said the place was built quickly, but everything passed inspection. Then he told me that a few other residents complained about odd noises, but he chalked it up to standard new building quirks. I asked if anyone else had issues with phone interference or weird leaks. He said not that he knew of. I got the feeling he just wanted me to drop the subject. I started thinking about moving out. But I'd sunk my savings into this place, so I tried to hold off. I thought maybe I could adapt. Maybe the noises were typical. Maybe the phone stuff was just me hitting the wrong settings by accident. None of that convinced me deep down, but I told myself all of it anyway. One night everything was quiet for once. No knocks in the floor, no tapping in the pipes. I felt relief. I dozed off around 11. Then sometime after midnight I woke up feeling an odd vibration under my mattress. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and listened. It was a low humming, like machinery running somewhere below me. It came in short bursts. My teeth started chattering because I was cold with anxiety. I slid out of bed, walked around my room, and felt the floor. The vibration was stronger near one corner. I pressed my ear to the laminate. I couldn't make out any voices or obvious mechanical sounds. It was just a pulsing hum that lasted a few seconds, stopped, then started again. It reminded me of the lab rumor. The idea of chemical waste or leftover machines underground made my skin crawl. I rushed to the living room and tried to calm myself. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. After a few minutes, the humming stopped. I stayed up for an hour, waiting for it to return. It never did. I eventually fell asleep on the couch, too tense to go back into the bedroom. I started making daily notes of odd events. I jotted down the times and dates of the tapping, the phone glitches, and any unusual sounds. The pattern was inconsistent, but mostly happened after midnight. Some nights nothing, other nights multiple incidents. The building itself looked normal. Bright hallways, normal neighbors, management that kept the place generally clean. It was just these random, unexplained moments that filled me with dread. I haven't left yet. I'm trying to decide what to do. I still hear the knocks sometimes. I still jump when my phone screen lights up by itself. I still think about that chemical smell in the garage. No one's died, and there are no screaming ghosts in the hallway. But my nerves are shot. My body tenses up when I hear the slightest noise in the walls. I can't sleep without a lamp on. I check my phone obsessively to make sure the volume is muted. Every time the pipe tapping returns, my heart feels like it's going to burst through my chest. I'm hoping the building management will do more inspections, or that the weird activity will stop. But I can't shake the feeling that something about this building isn't right. Maybe it's leftover residue from that incineration site. Maybe it's just the result of rushed construction. All I know is that I've never felt this unsettled in a place that's supposed to be my home. For now, I'm just waiting. Every night I wait for that first knock to echo through the walls. Every morning I hope that some logical explanation will surface. But it never does. And here I am, living in a brand new condo that feels anything but normal. I wish I had answers. At this point, I'd settle for a plain old plumbing problem. But something tells me there's more going on here than bad construction. Maybe it's just in my head, or maybe there's something lurking in these walls that nobody wants to acknowledge. Either way, I'm stuck with it, and it's getting harder to pretend everything's fine. I never expected anything strange to happen on a routine business trip. The hotel was cheap, the days were long, and I was only there for a mandatory training session. I didn't think I'd end up lying awake at 3 a.m, staring at my phone in shock. But that's exactly what happened, and it left me with a knot in my stomach that still tightens every time I remember that night. I had arrived at the hotel on a Monday afternoon. The flight was bumpy, but not the worst I've experienced. I got my room key from the front desk. The receptionist looked tired, and I felt the same. My coworker, Kevin, was staying 2 doors down from me on the same corridor. We were there for a 3-day training seminar. The company booked everything on a budget, so the place was nothing fancy. Simple beds, thin walls, a small TV on a rickety dresser. The first day of training was long. The instructors were strict, and they overloaded us with charts, slides, and examples. My head felt heavy by the end of the session. Kevin and I grabbed dinner at a nearby diner. The food was greasy, but at least it was warm. I went back to my room around 9 at night. I tried to prepare for the next day's session. I sat at the small desk in my room with a pile of notes. My phone buzzed once, but it was just an automated message from the airline about my return flight details. I turned the phone on silent after that because I wanted to focus. I studied until my eyes got sore. Around 11:30, I realized I was exhausted. I shuffled over to the bed, checked the alarm, and made sure I'd set it for 6 a.m. Then I set my phone face down on the nightstand. The mattress was lumpy and the pillow was too soft, but I fell asleep anyway. I remember shifting around a few times. The sounds in the hallway sometimes broke through the thin walls, people walking, doors closing. I heard Kevin cough once through the wall, but that didn't stop me from dozing off again. At some point, I felt my phone vibrating. The noise wasn't too loud, but the vibration rattled on the wooden nightstand. My eyes opened. The alarm clock next to the bed said 3:00 a.m. in its dull red glow. I couldn't believe my phone was ringing that late. My first thought was that maybe my family was calling with an emergency. That shot a surge of adrenaline through me. I reached for the phone, and before I even answered, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. The caller ID showed my own number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. I couldn't process it. My heart thumped in my chest. My mind raced with possibilities. A glitch? A spoof? Some kind of weird error with the service? But at 3 in the morning, I wasn't thinking straight. I just pressed the green button to answer, my hand shaking a bit. When I lifted the phone to my ear, I heard muffled sounds. It was like someone trying to speak through water. It made my skin crawl. I kept listening, and then I caught a faint tone that reminded me of my own voice. It didn't sound normal. It was distorted and had this desperate edge. The voice kept repeating my name over and over, like it was searching for help. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. A trickle of sweat ran down the side of my face. My hand was cold and my breath caught in my throat. I forced myself to say something. I said, "Who is this?" trying to keep my voice steady. The only answer was a hiss of static, and then the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen. The call had ended. My heart still beat fast and I was confused. My phone's recent calls list didn't show anything at all. There was no entry for the last incoming call. It was as if nothing had happened. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I was dreaming. I decided I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. The dim lamp above the desk was still on, and I could see every detail of the room. The scratchy comforter on my bed, the small suitcase on the floor, the stack of notes on the desk. It all felt real. I could still feel the slight dampness on my palm where I'd gripped the phone. My body felt tense. My jaw was clenched and my neck felt stiff. I told myself it might have been a prank or some weird glitch. That didn't explain the voice, though. I know my own voice well enough to recognize it, even if it's distorted. Something about the tone and the way my name was said freaked me out. I sat there for about 15 minutes, staring at the phone, occasionally flipping through the call log to see if the entry would appear. It never did. At one point, I looked out into the hallway through the peephole in my door. Nobody was outside. The corridor light was flickering a bit, but there was no sign of movement. Eventually, I grabbed a bottle of water from my suitcase. I gulped some down, trying to calm my nerves. The water felt cool, and it cleared my head just a little. I thought about knocking on Kevin's door, but it was too late, and I didn't want to scare him or seem irrational. I also figured he'd be asleep, and maybe it was just a one-time glitch that wouldn't happen again. I turned on the TV to see if that would distract me. The channels were mostly infomercials or reruns. I tried to watch a show, but I couldn't focus. My ears kept tuning in to every little sound in the hallway. I heard the elevator ding at one point, but there were no voices. I tried to go back to sleep around 4 in the morning. I lay there, my phone on silent, the ringer volume turned off. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed that muffled voice. The memory made my heart skip. My muscles were tight and my head pounded. I drifted in and out of a restless sleep until my alarm buzzed at 6. When I got up, I felt groggy and on edge. I dragged myself into the shower, letting the water run hot. My mind kept going back to the call. That frustration built up. I wanted an explanation. I wanted something logical to make it all go away. After getting dressed, I stepped out into the hallway and saw Kevin leaving his room. He looked better rested than me, but still a bit annoyed at having to wake up early. While we walked to the lobby, I asked him if anyone had come knocking on his door in the middle of the night, or if he'd heard anything weird. He said no. He asked why I was asking. I told him I got a strange call at 3. I didn't go into detail at first, I just said it was a weird call. He shrugged and said maybe it was a wrong number. He was more focused on getting coffee. At breakfast, in the small hotel dining area, I decided to explain more. I said the call appeared to come from my own phone number. Kevin set down his coffee cup and looked at me like I was joking. I assured him I wasn't making it up. He suggested it might be a phone company glitch or a spoofed call. I nodded. Then I mentioned the voice, how it sounded like someone trying to speak underwater, and how it seemed to be calling my name. Kevin's face changed from skeptical to uneasy. He asked if I was messing with him, and I said I wasn't. When we arrived at the training room, I tried to shift my focus to the lectures. The trainer droned on about compliance procedures and data management. My eyes felt heavy. I was exhausted, but I kept thinking about that voice. Sometimes I'd glance at my phone, half expecting another call. It never came. I kept checking the call logs again whenever we had breaks, but there was nothing new. During our lunch break, Kevin and I talked more. He suggested we check with the hotel's front desk about any calls that might have been transferred to my room, though it wouldn't explain why my own number showed up. We asked the front desk clerk if any calls came in from my room last night. The clerk shook his head. He said their system logs all calls, and he didn't see any entries for my room after 10 p.m. That didn't help. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. The training ended around 5. I ate dinner with Kevin at the same diner. We didn't talk about the call much because it was making me uneasy, and Kevin seemed uncomfortable with the subject. After dinner, we went back to our rooms. I stood in the hallway for a while, looking at my door, wondering if I'd be able to sleep. Part of me wanted to stay up all night and see if something else would happen. Another part of me just wanted to sleep and forget everything. I walked into my room, closed the door, and turned on all the lights. I sat on the bed, scrolled through my phone's settings looking for anything that might have been tampered with. Everything looked normal. Eventually, I called my own number from the hotel room phone just to see if that triggered anything. It rang as usual, then went to my voicemail. I hung up. My phone showed a missed call from the hotel phone's number. That was normal. There was no echo call from my own number, no weird voice. I stayed up until midnight again, studying for the next day. My eyes were burning and I felt jumpy at every little sound. The air conditioner kicked on with a loud thud, and I nearly jumped out of the chair. I decided to turn off the overhead light and keep only the lamp on. My phone was on silent again, but I left it face up, so I could see the screen if it lit up. I must have fallen asleep around 1 a.m. This time I slept through until my alarm woke me at 6. No calls, no strange sounds. I turned off the alarm and noticed my phone's battery was nearly dead, even though it was at 50% before I went to sleep. That was odd. I grabbed my charger and plugged it in. My heart started pounding again as I realized there was a chance something had happened during the night that I missed. But I checked the call logs. Nothing. Checked my texts. Nothing. I finished the final day of training, feeling relieved that I'd soon be leaving. After the session ended, Kevin suggested we change our flights and leave that evening instead of staying another night. He said we could try to catch a red-eye flight home. I jumped at the idea. We managed to find seats on a later flight, so we checked out of the hotel around 7 p.m. The clerk didn't ask why we were leaving early, and I didn't bother explaining. On the drive to the airport, Kevin asked if I felt better getting out of that place. I said I did. He said maybe it was a one-time thing. He was trying to reassure me, but I could tell he was still a little curious. I told him that whatever it was, I wanted to forget it. I didn't want to think about it anymore. We got on our flight and I made it home late that night. My phone didn't act up again. I tried to relax during the weekend, but the memory kept floating into my head, especially when I was about to fall asleep. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced I heard my name. Then I'd realize I was alone in my room and my phone was silent. A week later, I called my service provider and asked them if they had any record of a call to my phone at 3 a.m. on that date. They said they didn't. They checked my logs and said the last activity before morning was some automated text message from earlier that evening. I told them about the call with my own number, and the representative said it was possible someone spoofed my caller ID, but they didn't have any direct evidence. They suggested I reset my phone. I reset my phone, changed some security settings, and never experienced anything like that again. Still, I can't explain the voice I heard. It wasn't just static. It was my voice, calling my own name, and it sounded desperate. I don't have a neat conclusion. I can only say that it happened, it felt real, and it shook me up. Sometimes I try to let it go and move on, but late at night when my phone rings, I still hesitate before I pick it up. I glance at the caller ID and I brace myself for a moment, because I can't forget that feeling. My own number flashing on the screen at 3 a.m., and that muffled voice calling my name in the dark. I've always slept like a rock. That was my thing. I'd hit the pillow, and the next thing I knew, my alarm was blaring at 6 in the morning. But in the last few weeks, that deep, uninterrupted sleep has disappeared. I've been waking up multiple times a night, and I feel my heart racing the second my eyes open. My body's tense, and I have this certainty that something is in the room with me. I've never dealt with anything like this before. I just moved into this loft a few months ago. It's a short walk from my job in the city center, and I thought it would be perfect. The rent is a bit high, but I like the open space and the fact that I didn't have to drive to work anymore. It seemed like a good choice at the time. On my first night here, I slept fine. I was exhausted from hauling furniture, so I crashed pretty hard. The next night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. I remember checking my phone and feeling irritated. I had no clue why I was awake. I tried to go back to sleep, but I felt an odd pressure in the room, like someone else was there. I shrugged it off as stress. New place, new noises. Maybe my subconscious was on high alert. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. About 2 weeks in, I started noticing a shape in the far corner of my bedroom area. My loft is basically one big open space with a semi-partition for the bedroom, but the corners are still pretty dark at night. Sometimes, in the haze of half-sleep, I'd catch sight of a tall, dark silhouette. I'd squint, trying to make sense of it. It looked like a person standing there, silent and still, but with no features. I couldn't see a face or even the outline of clothes. Just a dark, vaguely human shape. I'd blink, and sometimes it would fade. Other times it stayed until my eyes adjusted, and then I'd convince myself it was just a shadow from the street lamp outside. The worst night so far happened about a week ago. I woke up because I felt the bed sink at the foot. It was this gentle dip in the mattress, like someone had just perched on the edge. I froze. My heart pounded so loud that I could hear my pulse in my ears. I wanted to lunge for the light switch on the nightstand, but I couldn't make myself move. My mind was stuck. I kept thinking, there's no one here. There's no way. I locked the door. The windows are shut. But the feeling of weight on the bed was so clear. Finally, I managed to flick on the lamp. As soon as the light filled the room, the pressure was gone. Nobody was there. I rushed to check the loft door. It was locked. The chain was in place. The windows were locked too. Everything was secure. I stood there in my boxers, breathing hard, trying to calm down. My hands shook, and I realized I had goosebumps all over my arms. After that, I couldn't get back to sleep. I started doing little checks every evening. I'd come home from work, turn on a few lights, look around for any signs of forced entry. I'd test the locks just to be sure. Sometimes I'd even push on the windows to see if they were loose or if anyone could pry them open. No issues. Everything was normal, but the feeling of being watched was constant once the sun set. I'd sit on my couch trying to relax with a late dinner, but I'd catch myself glancing over at the bedroom area every few seconds. My breathing would turn shallow. My mouth felt dry. I'd crack open a beer or two, hoping it would take the edge off. I started sleeping with the TV on. I'd mute it and leave it on some random channel. The low light from the screen made the space feel less empty. But then weird things started happening with the TV. A few times I woke up to static. That old school snow that I thought didn't even exist anymore with modern cable. I'd stare at it, half asleep, and wonder if my cable box was malfunctioning. Then I'd change the channel back, and everything would be fine. Another night, I found it had switched to a local news station. I'm sure I didn't set it there because I hate watching news in the middle of the night. It felt like the TV had a mind of its own. I told a coworker about my sleep troubles, but I left out the strange details. I just said I've been restless. He mentioned that maybe I'm stressed about living alone for the first time. He said people sometimes experience sleep hallucinations or paralysis. I didn't argue, but it didn't feel like that. This presence felt real. I could almost sense the air change when it was around. The room felt colder, Or maybe my body temperature would drop because I was scared. I'm not sure. But I know my pulse would spike and my hands would sweat. Sometimes I'd catch myself clenching my jaw so tight that my teeth hurt. One night I decided to stay up late and try to catch whatever was happening. I turned the lights down low. I had my TV on mute as usual, but I sat upright in bed with my back against the wall. I tried to keep my eyes open, but around 2 in the morning, I started drifting off. I jerked awake when I heard the distinct click of the TV channels changing. The screen flickered from a talk show to a cooking channel, then to static. My remote was on the bedside table out of my reach. There was no reason for the channels to switch like that. I forced myself to look around. My heart thudded, and I felt my hands clench the blanket. There was no one in the room. At least I didn't see anyone. But in the corner, that shadow was back. Tall, dark, motionless. My eyes teared up and my face felt hot. I wanted to call out, but the words stuck in my throat. I stared at it for what felt like forever, trying to figure out if it was some shape cast by the half-open closet door or the furniture. But it looked so distinct. I fumbled for the lamp, and by the time the light came on, the corner was empty. I barely slept after that. I went to work the next morning feeling like a zombie. My boss asked if I was sick. I just said I wasn't sleeping well. I wondered if I should think about moving out. But I just got this place and I can't break the lease so soon. Plus, moving costs money I don't have right now. I convinced myself it had to be stress. Maybe I was imagining shapes in the dark. Maybe the TV was glitching for some technical reason. But something in my gut told me that wasn't the whole story. On a Saturday, I decided to do a deep cleaning. I thought maybe if the place felt fresher, I'd sleep better. I vacuumed, dusted, checked every corner. The place isn't that big, so it didn't take long. Then I tested all the outlets, all the surge protectors, just to see if there was some electrical short causing the TV to freak out. Everything seemed fine. That night, though, the same thing happened. I went to bed with the TV on mute, set to a comedy channel. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of faint static. I realized the volume was on, but not loud enough to wake the neighbors. I never touch the volume before sleeping. I always leave it on mute. My heart pounded as I fumbled for the remote. My throat felt tight. I remember thinking, if something can turn on the volume, it can probably do a lot of other things. I turned off the TV altogether, deciding maybe darkness was better. I lay there on my back, staring at the ceiling. My breath was quick, and I felt my palms sweating again. Then I heard a soft thump in the corner like a footstep. I bolted upright and squinted into the shadows. The shape was there, tall and dark. I could see it against the faint light coming in from the window. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I scrambled for my phone on the bedside table. I turned on the flashlight feature. The bright beam cut across the room. The shape vanished. There was nothing there. I stayed like that for several minutes, shining my phone flashlight around like a cop searching a crime scene. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to walk over and physically touch the walls and corners. The only thing there was my hamper and a few boxes. No sign of a person or even an outline that could resemble a figure. I went back to bed, leaving my phone flashlight on until the battery died. A few days later, I had the locks changed. I asked the locksmith if he noticed any signs of tampering. He said no. Everything looked intact. I told him I just wanted to be safe. He said that was understandable. That night I felt a little more secure, but I still woke up around 2. I stared at the corner. It was just darkness. But I sensed something. My muscles were tense, and my breathing went shallow. I felt that familiar prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I said in a normal speaking voice, "Whoever you are, get out." I felt stupid talking to an empty room, but I didn't know what else to do. I turned on the lamp and stayed like that until morning. In the mornings, the loft looks completely normal. Sunlight pours in through the windows, and I think, this place is fine. I'm overreacting. but I can't shake the memory of that presence at night. I started coming home from work later just so I'd be more tired and hopefully crash fast. But it doesn't matter how tired I am. I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing. I've tried to record some of it on my phone camera. One night I set my phone on a shelf facing the bed. I left it recording while I slept. I didn't see anything on the video the next day except me tossing and turning. The only weird part was that the audio had a strange crackle for a few seconds around 3:15 a.m. It sounded like interference or static. There was no explanation for it. No trucks passed outside at that time. No phones rang. No alarms. Just that crackle and then back to normal silence. I don't want to move. I like this location, and I just started to settle in. But living alone hasn't been the relaxing experience I hoped for. I've talked to my coworker again, and he keeps saying it's stress. He suggests maybe I should see a therapist about my sleep problems. I'm actually considering it now. Maybe it's all in my head. But I can't convince myself that the shape in the corner is just my imagination. It feels too real. The bed actually felt like it sank that one night. I can't ignore that. And the TV still changes channels on its own. I even bought a new remote, just in case there was something wrong with the old one. No difference. Sometimes I wonder if I'm going to reach a breaking point. I walk around the loft, and I check everything 3 times before I go to sleep. Windows, door locks, even the little hallway closet. It's become a ritual. Then I climb into bed, turn on the TV, mute it, and tell myself I'm fine. But deep down, I know I'm not fine. I'm exhausted. I feel edgy at work. I'm jumpy with every small noise. I've caught myself flinching when a coworker taps me on the shoulder. I'm always on high alert. Last night was another rough one. I woke up to the distinct feeling that someone was standing right by the bed near my head. I kept my eyes shut, thinking if I didn't look, maybe it would go away. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and my breathing sounded loud. My skin felt cold and my stomach churned. After a few seconds, I forced my eyes open. I looked up. The space was empty, but I felt that presence lingering. I reached over and clicked on the lamp. The faint glow lit up the area around me, but it didn't do much for the far side of the loft. I stayed awake, clenching my teeth, waiting for dawn. I'm at the point where I'm not sure what to believe. Maybe this is all in my head, and I need professional help. Or maybe there's something in this loft that isn't leaving me alone. I've read enough online forums to know that people experience strange things when they're under a lot of pressure, but I've also seen posts about weird occurrences that nobody can explain. Right now I can only say that every night I see or feel something, and every night I'm too scared to sleep properly. The loft feels smaller and smaller, and my own home doesn't feel safe anymore. I don't know what my next step is. I could break the lease, but that might not solve anything if the problem is me. If it's stress or some mental glitch, it might follow me wherever I go. On the other hand, I don't want to spend another 3 months feeling like there's a silent figure looming over my bed. I hate feeling helpless. I'm not used to being scared in my own place. I'm used to sleeping like a log, waking up rested, and heading to work like anyone else. Now I'm just a restless mess, jumping at shadows and triple-checking locks. That's where things stand. Every night I go to bed hoping for peace, and every night I wake up feeling that presence, seeing that shape or hearing the TV switch itself to static. I wish I could say I found a solution, but I haven't. I just keep pushing through my days, tired and uneasy, wondering if tonight will be the night it finally stops, if it ever stops at all. I still remember the exact moment when I noticed something felt off about that mountain range. It wasn't the usual excitement of a new trek or the roughness of the terrain. It was this heavy vibe in the air that made my skin prickle. My group and I had explored plenty of places before, but something about this area seemed uninviting. It wasn't a matter of difficulty or altitude. It was just a strange feeling that crept over me when we set foot there. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself it was just nerves. Now looking back, I realized that I should have paid more attention to that first instinct. We started out early in the morning. There were 6 of us. We were all used to the typical routine. We checked our gear, loaded our packs, and headed into the trails. The path was overgrown in some places, and there were no signs pointing the way. The region was barely on any map. We had heard rumors of a nice waterfall and some untouched spots where the view stretched on for miles. Our plan was to spend 3 nights out there, maybe more if we found good trails. We carried enough food, water filters, and all the usual stuff. It felt like any other trip except for that nagging heaviness in the back of my mind. We reached an old shelter by late afternoon. It was a simple structure, basically some logs stacked together to create walls with a half-rotten wooden door and a leaky tin roof. The place had no electricity. We relied on lanterns and headlamps. We had a couple of small propane stoves, but we mostly planned to use the fire pit out front. The surrounding forest felt thick, but not in a comforting way. The trees grew close, and the underbrush formed a dense layer that was hard to navigate. Still, we settled in. We stashed our gear in corners and spread our sleeping bags out on the rough wooden floor. The day passed normally. We collected water from the stream nearby, boiled some for drinking, and just hung around sharing snacks. The second day began without any real drama. We woke up, ate a quick breakfast, and set out to explore a ridge half a mile north. The trail was steep in places and muddy in others. We had to hack through some branches just to keep moving. Nothing unusual showed up besides a few scattered animal tracks we couldn't identify clearly. We saw a couple of deer in the distance, but that was it. We made our way back before nightfall, because it felt unwise to get lost in an unknown area with no clear landmarks. That night I was sitting by the fire outside talking with a friend named Marcus. We were discussing the strange vibe we both sensed, though we couldn't put our fingers on it. The air felt heavier as the sun went down. You know how sometimes you get a chill on your arms even if it's not that cold? That was happening to me. I tried to brush it off. Then, around 8 or 9 in the evening, someone realized we were running low on firewood. I volunteered to go get more because I wanted something to do. Marcus said he'd come with me. We grabbed our headlamps and set out toward the stream, where we knew there was plenty of dead wood. Walking at night in a forest always feels a bit strange. The sounds change and your mind can play tricks on you. We kept our lamps pointed at the ground while scanning left and right for good pieces of wood. The air smelled damp, but not unpleasant. About 15 minutes in, we got to a spot near the water where we could pick up some branches. Everything seemed ordinary until I spotted something in the mud. I froze and aimed my headlamp straight at it. The track was huge, maybe twice the size of my foot. It wasn't the imprint of a regular paw. It looked more like a split hoof or some elongated foot shape. The edges weren't crisp, but I could see distinct halves, like a large cloven hoof pressed deep into the muddy ground. It was fresh too, with clear ridges. Marcus came over and squatted down, running his hand around it without touching the center. He muttered, "What the hell made this?" I didn't have an answer. There were more prints extending along the creek bank, almost in a line. They were spaced in a way that suggested something big was walking on 2 legs, but the shape looked more like it should have been 4-legged. We stared, trying to figure out the pattern. Then a strange odor caught my attention. It was like wet fur, but way stronger than any animal smell I'd ever experienced. It seemed to cut through the crisp night air and settle around us. At first I thought it was the wind carrying the scent, but after a few seconds I realized there was no wind blowing in our direction. It was like the smell was moving on its own, circling us. Marcus and I exchanged quick glances. We both felt a spike of unease. I tried to focus on gathering wood. I didn't want to start panicking, but my hands were shaking a bit. Every twig snap or rustle in the bushes made me flinch. Then we heard a deep whistle, almost like someone trying to call a dog, but lower in pitch. It had a kind of drawn-out quality that made my chest tighten. We both stopped moving. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My palms started sweating, even though the night was cool. We stood there listening. At that moment, I heard a rustling in the nearby brush. It was slow, like something big shifting its weight. When you hear a deer or a boar, it has a certain pattern. This was different. It sounded more deliberate, like a thing trying to remain hidden but still curious. The smell lingered, and the sound of that whistle faded but didn't vanish completely. It was like I could still feel its vibration in the air. Marcus whispered, "Let's go." I didn't argue. We grabbed what wood we had and started back to the shelter at a faster pace than usual. My headlamp bounced around, illuminating tree trunks and undergrowth in shaky beams. The forest seemed darker than before, and the noises all around felt louder than usual. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching under our boots. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following us. Each time I turned around, my light only revealed trees and shrubs. But that smell was inescapable, like it was attached to us. We got back to the shelter in record time, stumbling over roots and rocks. When we arrived, a couple of people noticed our expressions and asked what happened. We described the tracks and the strange sound. Some of our friends laughed nervously, saying it was probably a wild boar or maybe a large deer. Nobody had a concrete explanation for the track shape, though. We tried to settle our nerves by sitting around the fire. Someone told a story about a weird sighting they once had in another forest, but it was more of a joke. The tension in the air was real, though. We eventually turned in for the night. The shelter didn't have locks on the door, but we secured it with a wooden bar that fit across the frame. I rolled out my sleeping bag in a corner near a window. The wind, if there was any, had died down. The night was quiet except for occasional crackling from the embers outside. I lay there, heart still racing, hoping the feeling would pass. I woke up when it was still dark, maybe around 3 or 4 in the morning. Something had disturbed me. My initial thought was that I needed to use the bathroom, but then I heard a faint crunching sound outside. It was like footsteps, slow and irregular, circling the shelter. I held my breath. My mind raced, imagining someone or something creeping around out there. The sound continued for a while, then stopped. I waited, but eventually, my eyes grew heavy again. I drifted back to sleep against my better judgment. When dawn finally came, I got up before most of the others. I wanted to see if there was any sign outside. Marcus joined me, looking just as uneasy as I felt. We stepped out to find several large footprints all around the shelter, like they'd been circling us for hours. The tracks were spaced in a ring, always at about the same distance from the walls of the shelter. They looked the same as the ones we found by the creek, shaped like split hooves or something similar, each pressed deep into the muddy ground around the perimeter. It was almost like a boundary line, as if something had walked around the structure multiple times. Marcus swore under his breath. We stood there for a few minutes trying to grasp the size of whatever made them. My legs felt weak. The rest of the group came out one by one, and we all stared at these marks. No one had a solid explanation. We talked about it, each offering random ideas. A large deer, a moose, some kind of hybrid animal. But none of those suggestions matched the shape or the size of what we were seeing. And none of them whistled like that. We gathered our things, deciding to do a quick check of the perimeter in daylight. We found more of these prints leading away from the shelter and vanishing into thicker brush where we couldn't follow without serious bushwhacking. We had no appetite for that kind of pursuit, so we let it go. The rest of the day we tried to do what we came for, explore. But our minds stayed focused on what had happened. We stuck closer together, moving as a group. We kept our eyes on the ground for more tracks. We saw a few partial prints here and there, but nothing is clear. We kept hearing random noises that we couldn't identify. Sometimes it sounded like branches snapping in the distance. Sometimes it was that same low whistle, but always faint, like it was coming from far away. It never got as close as it did that night by the creek. By the time evening came again, we agreed to cut the trip short. None of us wanted to spend another night in that place. We packed our gear, leaving just the essentials out for breakfast. The mood was tense. People were jumpy. Every time the trees swayed, somebody turned their head to check. Even the old jokes about forest ghosts didn't lighten the air. We all felt the same undercurrent of fear. We spent that night in the shelter, but this time no one slept well. We took turns keeping watch, shining our flashlights around. straining our ears for any sound outside. A few times I heard soft movements, but they didn't last. Around midnight, that wet fur smell came back, drifting through the cracks in the walls. It lingered for maybe 30 minutes before fading. My eyes watered from trying to stay awake and alert. At sunrise, we got out of there. We left behind whatever was lurking in that forest. As we hiked back, some of us kept looking over our shoulders, expecting to see tracks right behind us. But we never found any on the trail leading away from the shelter. The feeling of being watched, though, didn't fade until we were well out of the area. When we finally reached our vehicles, the sense of relief washed over me. The others felt it too. We talked about what happened, trying to decide if we should report it to local authorities or park rangers. In the end, we mentioned it to a ranger at a nearby station, but we had no solid proof other than the photos of the tracks. He didn't seem too alarmed, just said it might have been a large wild boar or something else. We left it at that. None of us felt satisfied with that explanation. I don't know if what we encountered was a regular animal or something else. The prints, that deep whistle, and the way it circled the shelter at night still send a chill through me when I think about it. I've been on a lot of treks, but I've never felt that level of tension. Even months later, I can't shake the memory of that wet fur smell surrounding me in the dark. Sometimes late at night, I recall the shape of those tracks and feel my heart thump a little harder. That's all I can say for sure. Something was out there, and it was bigger than anything I've personally seen in the wild. It had a presence that didn't feel normal. Maybe it was just a rare animal defending its territory. Maybe it was something else. Whatever the truth might be, that trip taught me to pay attention to my gut. The forest holds things we don't always understand, and sometimes it's best to keep moving and not look back too long. I never expected a worn-down meeting hall to make me question what I knew about old buildings. I started the restoration project thinking it would be straightforward. I had some basic knowledge of carpentry and a little interest in history. I volunteered because the place had a certain charm. The group that built it was some local fraternal order from the early 1900s. People said they held private ceremonies here, but I never found any solid proof. Everything about the building seemed typical. High ceilings, chipped plaster, old wooden floors. It was big and needed a lot of work. Over time, it became clear that the building had hidden corners and locked rooms that hadn't been touched in decades. I felt curious about what might be left behind. During the day, the place felt normal, although dusty. I usually worked with a small team. We patched walls, replaced broken tiles, and tried to keep the structure from collapsing. The outside was impressive, with tall columns and an arched entrance. Inside, it was darker and smelled of old wood and mold. We spent most of our time bringing in new materials and hauling out debris. Most people on the team went home by sunset. The electrical system was old, so the lights were unreliable. Only a few parts of the building had modern lighting. That was why I stayed late one evening. I needed to sort through some old items in the basement and figure out what could be salvaged or documented. The basement was cramped, filled with shelves of dusty boxes and wooden crates. There were old chairs stacked in corners, a few rotting tables, and a broken podium. I remember there was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, but it didn't cover the entire area. I had a flashlight with me to see the far edges of the room. I felt fine at first, just tired from a long day. I was making my way through some boxes of papers and photos. Some were official documents from the group that used to meet here. Some were minutes from their meetings, some were receipts for building supplies, and a few were just personal letters. I thought I'd be alone down there for about an hour, maybe two. I didn't hear anything unusual at first. The basement was quiet. The only sounds were my footsteps on the concrete floor and an occasional drip of water from a pipe somewhere in the walls. After about an hour, I noticed a small wooden door on the far side of the basement. I remembered it being locked. Earlier that day, I had tested the knob out of curiosity, and it didn't budge. But now the door stood slightly open, almost inviting me to look inside. I felt a pinch of discomfort in my stomach. I tried to tell myself it was just an old door that had somehow come loose. Maybe the lock was broken, or maybe the wood had warped. Still, it felt strange. I walked over and pushed the door all the way open. Beyond it, I saw a narrow corridor that definitely wasn't on the current floor plan. We had old blueprints spread out upstairs, and I never saw any mention of an extra corridor or room in this area. The hallway inside was dark, so I grabbed my flashlight. It cut through the darkness, but only a few feet ahead. Everything beyond was shadowy and tight. The walls were made of old brick. It smelled damp, like earth and stale air. I wanted to see what was there, so I stepped inside. The corridor was colder than the basement. It made no sense because it was summer and the rest of the basement felt stuffy. My skin prickled. I could see my breath if I exhaled heavily. I tried to ignore the chill and kept moving forward. I assumed it might lead to a sealed-off storage area, or maybe an old set of stairs. The corridor stretched on for several yards, then turned sharply to the right. I kept going. My heart was pounding a bit harder now, but I didn't feel threatened, just uneasy. The floor was a mix of dirt and cracked concrete. I had to watch my step to avoid tripping on loose stones. My flashlight beam flickered once or twice, probably from low batteries. When I reached the end, I found a small room with a single wooden table and a chair. The room smelled of old books. There were empty shelves along one wall and a few scattered papers on the floor. The table had some candle wax on it, as if someone used candles here a long time ago. I tried to read a few of the papers, but the writing was faded. Some had symbols or markings that I didn't recognize right away. That's when I heard a low sound. It was a kind of murmur, like someone talking under their breath. I froze and held my breath for a moment. I stayed quiet, waiting to hear it again. It happened once more. Definitely a voice, but it was muffled and hard to place. I looked around, but the flashlight showed nothing but old brick and cobwebs. My chest felt tight and my heart thudded against my ribs. I kept thinking that maybe someone else was down here, some other volunteer or an intruder. But I hadn't seen any sign of another person. I decided to head back. I didn't like being down there alone, especially if someone might be hiding in the shadows. I turned around and walked quickly back toward the narrow corridor. My legs felt shaky. I was taking short breaths, trying to keep calm but failing. When I got to the corridor's entrance, I noticed the door I had come through was closed. I remembered leaving it wide open. I tried the knob and it didn't move. It felt stuck or locked. My pulse spiked. I pulled harder. The door rattled but didn't open. I started to feel a wave of panic in my stomach. I told myself maybe it jammed because of the damp wood. I tried putting my shoulder into it. The wood creaked, but it stayed shut. I pounded on the door, though I knew no one was upstairs to hear me. The walls muffled everything. I backed away and scanned the corridor for another exit. The walls looked solid. I saw no other doors or vents. The floor was uneven. I thought about calling someone on my phone, but I realized I had left it charging upstairs in the main hall. I cursed myself for being careless. I was alone with a dim flashlight and a door that wouldn't open. I stood still for a few moments, trying to think straight. My hands were damp with sweat and my throat felt dry. I clenched and unclenched my fists to steady myself. I walked back toward the small room, thinking there might be another hidden passage or a window. It was hard to concentrate because I kept feeling that cold air pressing against me. In the room, I moved the chair aside and crouched down to look under the table. I saw some boxes that were rotting away. I opened one and found old notebooks. The pages were brittle, and the covers were discolored. A few pages had writing in a language I didn't understand. I shuffled through them, hoping for clues or even a key. The candle wax and the arrangement of the table suggested people used to meet in this tiny room. I wondered why anyone would meet in such a cramped space. I heard that murmur again. It sounded closer. I gripped the flashlight tight and scanned the corners of the room. Nothing. The walls were blank except for the shelves. I aimed the flashlight at the ceiling and saw old beams with spider webs hanging. No sign of an opening there. I tried to control my breathing. I felt an urge to shout, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I wasn't sure if the voice belonged to someone who meant me harm. I walked to the far corner and found a narrow gap in the bricks. It looked like someone had tried to patch it from the other side. I pressed my ear to it and heard a faint draft. The air felt cooler there, like there was some space or passage on the other side. I pushed at the bricks, but they were solidly in place. I used the metal handle of the flashlight to tap them, hoping they might loosen. No luck. I went back to the corridor to try the door again. I pulled, pushed, and banged on it. My arms felt tired, and my shoulder began to ache. The wood cracked a little near the hinge, but it still refused to open. My breathing got heavier, and I started to sweat more. I realized I might be stuck here for a long time unless I found a different way out. That's when I decided to check every inch of the corridor walls. I walked slowly, running my free hand along the brick and mortar. I felt dampness and rough edges. My flashlight revealed the texture of old cement patches. In a few spots, the bricks looked newer. It occurred to me that parts of this corridor might have been sealed or altered after the original construction. I paused when I saw a small iron ring set into the wall about waist high. It was half hidden behind some debris. I tugged on it. It didn't move much at first. I put all my weight into it and it shifted slightly. I kept pulling and eventually heard a scraping sound. A section of the wall next to the ring seemed to shift a fraction of an inch. I felt a burst of hope. I wedged my fingers into the gap and tried to pull. The stone moved with a grinding noise. Dust fell from above, and I covered my mouth to avoid breathing it in. The entire section of the wall slid about a foot, revealing an opening that led somewhere else. It looked like another small chamber. The air coming from it smelled stale, but it was slightly warmer than the corridor. I crawled through, trying not to bump my head. Inside, I stood up and realized I was in a cramped space filled with old furniture. There were chairs stacked along the walls, a few small tables, and a large trunk in the center. My flashlight showed no immediate exit, but I saw a narrow staircase in the corner going up. The steps looked worn and creaked when I tested them. I felt a rush of relief. I moved toward the stairs. Halfway up, I heard the murmur again, louder this time. It was just behind me, as if someone stood at the bottom of the stairs. I whipped around, flashlight shining on empty space. My heart pounded. My throat was dry. I took a deep breath and turned back to climb. My legs felt weak. I forced myself to go step by step, ignoring the urge to look over my shoulder again. At the top of the stairs, I found a small wooden door. The handle turned, but the door seemed stuck. I pushed with my shoulder again. This time, the door creaked open, and I stumbled out into a different part of the building. It looked like another storage room, but it was on the main floor, or possibly a mezzanine I hadn't explored. The air felt less heavy, and I could hear distant street sounds. I relaxed a little, finally feeling safer. I noticed a switch on the wall, so I flipped it. A single overhead bulb flickered on. The room had a few dusty cabinets and an old coat rack. One of the walls had a boarded-up window that let in faint light from outside. I tried a door on the opposite side. It led into a hallway near the main auditorium. I recognized the high ceilings and the large doors that opened to the street. I was out of the hidden corridor. I walked toward the exit, stepping carefully because my legs were still shaky. The streetlights outside told me it was much later than I had realized. I felt a powerful need to get some fresh air. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my hands were trembling. I stood on the front steps of the building, breathing in the night air. The city around me felt normal, and I heard a car passing in the distance. I realized I had left my phone upstairs in a different room, but I didn't care. I just wanted a moment to calm down. My mind kept going back to that cold corridor, the locked door, and the voice I couldn't explain. Everything felt too real to be a simple trick of the imagination. Later that night, I told myself I wouldn't mention it to anyone. I didn't want rumors to spread and slow down the restoration project. But my hands still shook when I remembered the door slamming shut on its own. I still wonder what that murmur was and why the corridor never appeared on any blueprints. The building has a lot of history, and I suspect there's more hidden behind those walls. I think about going back down to explore, but part of me worries I'll get trapped again. There's something unsettling down there, something I can't explain with basic logic. For now, I'm focusing on the safer parts of the project, but I know that locked corridor still exists. I can't forget it, and sometimes I catch myself staring at the basement door, wondering if it will swing open on its own one more time. I got the job offer on a Tuesday morning. The demolition company's manager called me out of the blue and explained that they needed an inventory of a decommissioned hospital before they started tearing it down. He said the owner only allowed access in the early hours to avoid disrupting nearby construction work during the day. The pay was good, and I had worked on a few similar projects before, so I said yes. I didn't mind odd hours. I just wanted to get in, count what was left, make a note of any equipment, and hand over my report. But I had no idea how uneasy that old place would make me feel. I arrived around midnight. I parked my car next to a locked chain-link fence. The security guard was half asleep in a little booth at the gate. He woke up when I tapped on his window, checked my paperwork, and then opened the fence. He explained that the building didn't have full electricity anymore. The lights were patchy and the main power boxes were unreliable. I thanked him and drove through the open gate. The hospital looked massive in the dark. There were no streetlights around, and the big sign on the front was broken, with only a few letters still attached. Piles of debris and old construction material lined the perimeter. I locked my car and headed for the main entrance. I had a flashlight strapped to my belt, and I carried a small bag with a portable security monitor system, some tools, and a few empty folders to organize my findings. I also had a walkie-talkie to reach the security guard if anything happened. The front doors were glass, but they were covered in grime and old notices. One door was propped open. I slipped inside and found myself in a large lobby that smelled like damp concrete and stale air. Broken chairs and tables were pushed against the walls, and the floor was coated with a thin layer of dust. My boots made soft crunching sounds with each step. I walked down the main corridor, checking door after door. Each room had a small sign, but many were faded or missing. Some rooms had old beds with no mattresses. Some had large metal cabinets, and others were completely empty. My job was to note anything worth salvaging or reusing, so I jotted down the condition of a few stainless steel sinks and some overhead lights that still seemed intact. The quiet felt unnatural. A slight echo followed me wherever I went. At one point, I stopped to listen because I thought I heard another set of steps. It sounded like they were coming from the far end of the corridor. When I shone my flashlight around, I couldn't see anybody. I took a breath and continued. After about 20 minutes, I reached a section where the hospital records had been stored. There were rows of cabinets filled with old patient files. Papers were scattered on the floor, and a cold draft brushed past my shoulders. It felt like a small breeze, but there were no open windows that I could see. I zipped up my jacket and pushed forward. A few metal doors in that area wouldn't stay open. They swung shut by themselves, even though there wasn't much wind. One door slammed so hard that I jumped and nearly dropped my clipboard. My heart thumped. I stood there telling myself it was just the uneven floor or air pressure. I managed to steady my hands and moved on. I found a small administrative office with a single wooden desk and a few file boxes scattered around. The door had a busted lock, so it stayed open on its hinges. I set my bag on the desk, took out my portable monitor screens and placed them around so I could see different hallways at once. I had installed some small wireless cameras near the entrances to keep track of any movement. As soon as I switched on the monitors, I caught a flicker of motion in the main hall. It looked like a dark shape crossing from one side to the other. I blinked, thinking maybe it was a glitch. I stared at the screen, waiting. Nothing else happened. I told myself it might be my eyes playing tricks or a stray reflection from my flashlight. I started flipping through the scattered paperwork on the desk. Old invoices, maintenance logs, things like that. A strong odor of dust rose up. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath right behind me. It was a soft sound, like someone exhaling near my neck. I spun around with my flashlight aimed high. Nobody was there. The room was empty except for the desk and a row of cabinets. My pulse kicked up. I stayed still for a few seconds, listening. All I heard was a faint hum from somewhere in the walls, maybe a leftover electrical current or a broken ventilation fan. I swallowed hard and told myself to stay calm. I kept working, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I finished checking that office and stepped back into the hallway. The corridor lights flickered now and then, casting strange shadows. My mind was on full alert. Every time a piece of paper fluttered, I jumped. Doors kept creaking and the cold drafts felt stronger. At one point, I decided to check the main generator room, hoping to see if there was any explanation for the power issues. I walked to the lower level using the stairs. The stairwell smelled like mildew. The walls had signs of water damage. I pointed my flashlight at the steps to avoid tripping on any debris. When I reached the bottom, I tried a switch on the wall. A single fluorescent bulb lit up overhead, flickering like it was on its last legs. The generator room door was stuck. I put my shoulder into it until it gave way with a loud scrape. Inside, I found a row of rusty power boxes and a big generator in the corner. Everything looked old. Some wires were cut, and there was a puddle of water beneath a cracked pipe. I noted the condition in my folder, snapped a few pictures on my phone, and stepped back into the hallway. That hallway led me past a series of old storage rooms. I heard a muffled clang from somewhere ahead. It echoed once and then stopped. I turned off my flashlight for a moment to see if any light was coming from down the corridor. Total darkness. I turned the flashlight back on and kept going, slow and careful. The floors felt damp, and my boots left wet footprints behind. Another clang rang out, louder this time. It sounded like metal banging against metal. I gripped my flashlight tighter, not sure if there was someone else in the building. I reached the end of the hallway and found a door that led back upstairs. It was slightly ajar. I could feel a draft from the stairwell. That might explain the banging noise, maybe the wind was moving something. But as I placed my hand on the doorknob, I heard a whisper. It was a short, raspy sound. I froze, shining my light around. No one was there. My throat felt tight. I forced myself to open the door and head up. Each step up was slow. My knee joints felt stiff. The tension made me feel heavier than normal. On the second floor landing, I paused to catch my breath. My heart was racing more than it should for a simple set of stairs. Back on the main floor, I checked the time. It was around 2 a.m. I had a few more sections to inventory. One was a smaller wing with old scanning equipment. The other was a cluster of exam rooms near the emergency entrance. I decided to handle the scanning equipment first. I made my way through the hallway, passing by doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. Several times I thought I saw a quick movement in my peripheral vision. It was always a fleeting shape, gone when I turned my head. My palms were sweaty, and I kept wiping them on my pants. When I reached the equipment rooms, I found a large MRI machine covered in dust. Next to it, there was a smaller ultrasound machine. I took a few notes, snapped photos, and carefully checked the cables. Some heavy shadows filled the corners of that room because only one overhead light was working. I heard something scrape across the floor in the hallway outside. It sounded like a chair being pushed. My entire body went tense. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked into the hall, shining my flashlight around. A metal stool had moved a few feet from where I remembered seeing it earlier. The stool was on its side like it had been knocked over. I checked the floor for any sign of a trail, but there was only dust. My skin prickled. I picked up the stool and placed it against the wall. I stepped into the next room to finish the inventory there. The door had a small window and it rattled when I touched it. As soon as I entered, I noticed a slight echo in the space, like the walls were reflecting every sound. A long metal counter ran along one side, with old boxes stacked on top. I found some old hospital supplies inside. Gloves, bandages, and a few sealed bottles of disinfectant. Nothing of high value, but I logged it anyway. Suddenly, my portable monitor beeped. I looked at the screen. One of my cameras caught another quick flicker in the main hall. It seemed like a figure rushed from one side to the other. My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen for a long moment. No movement. I wanted to tell myself it was just a glitch, but my brain wasn't buying it. I decided to finish up quickly. I left the scanning area and headed for the emergency wing. That part of the hospital was darker than the rest. A few overhead bulbs were burnt out and the hallway smelled stale. I saw large double doors at the end. They led to old treatment rooms. As I walked, I heard doors slam behind me in the distance. Each slam made me jump. I glanced at my monitor now and then, but it kept showing static and the occasional flicker. I kept my eyes forward and tried to focus on the job. In the emergency wing, I found some gurneys against the wall. Their wheels squeaked when I brushed past. The exam rooms had old curtains, a few broken monitors, and random supplies. I saw a stack of trays, a couple of rolling tables, and an unplugged crash cart in the corner. While I was checking the drawers, I heard a soft thump behind me. It was like something dropping on the floor. When I turned around, I saw that one of the exam lights overhead was swinging, as if someone had nudged it. But I was alone as far as I could tell. My breathing turned shaky, and I felt an intense rush of heat in my face, even though the rest of the hallway was cold. I forced myself to stay and check the last of the rooms. Finally, around 3:30 a.m., I wrapped up my notes and decided I had enough information. My head was pounding from the constant tension. I packed my equipment, made my way back to the lobby, and paused near the front entrance. I took one last look at the dark corridors. Several doors were still closed, a few left open. I had done my job, but I felt uneasy, like the place was telling me to leave. As I stepped outside, a gust of cool night air hit me. I felt a wave of relief. The security guard was still in the booth, flipping through his phone. I told him I was done. He just nodded and opened the gate. I got in my car and locked the doors. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. I drove away, trying to push the memories of slamming doors, flickering shadows, and that breath on my neck out of my mind. The next day, I delivered my report to the demolition company. I stuck to the facts, listed the salvageable items, and made a note about the condition of the building. I didn't mention the strange sounds or the shapes I saw on the monitors. It would have sounded crazy. Maybe the place was just drafty and in disrepair. Maybe my imagination was on overdrive. But I know how I felt in those corridors. I know the chill that ran down my spine. And I'm not eager to set foot in another abandoned hospital anytime soon. I still remember the first time I saw that goat. It was around 3 a.m. and I was standing on a wide, flat rock, holding my fishing rod with both hands. The smell of the ocean was strong, and the wind felt a little colder than usual. My flashlight caught something on the edge of the rocks a few steps from the water. I turned the beam and saw this black goat, thin and motionless, staring back at me. It looked all wrong. I had never seen a goat out there, and I fish along that stretch of rocky coastline 2 or 3 nights a week. It wasn't a place for goats. There aren't any obvious trails, and tourists don't bring farm animals. My heart skipped a beat. I just stood there, not sure what I was dealing with. Then it took a small step backward, and when I moved my light, it vanished. That was the start of something I can't fully explain. I live on the coast and work during the day, so I head out for fishing trips a few nights a week, sometimes right after midnight. The beach is quieter at that hour. I don't deal with the hot sun or with the people who crowd the shoreline during the day. The fish also seem more active at night. I usually bring a headlamp, a flashlight, my rods, a small cooler, and a bag with extra tackle. The rocky point I like is about a 15-minute walk from the closest parking area. It's not easy to get there if you're not used to rocky terrain. I've walked that path so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. Over the years, I've learned every step, every slippery spot, every patch of sand that shifts under my weight. I've never seen any goat tracks. The whole place is mostly wet rocks, scattered shells, and seaweed. It's not a good place for large animals to wander. That night, I remember the sky being cloudy. There wasn't much moonlight. The ocean looked black, except where the waves foamed white. My flashlight beam was the only light source I had. I turned it toward the goat. It stood on a rock slightly higher than the one I was on, maybe about 10 feet away. It was scrawny. Its fur was pitch black and clung to its bones. The goat had these narrow eyes, almost grayish in the light. The weirdest thing was the way it looked at me. It didn't feel like a skittish farm animal. It felt like it was sizing me up. My pulse started pounding in my ears. I felt this tightness in my chest as if I was intruding on something. I took a step forward, and that goat jerked its head. Then I tried to angle my flashlight to see if maybe there was a path leading up from the other side. The moment I moved the beam, I heard a quiet scuffling sound. I swung the light back and the goat was gone. I stood there, confused. I tried to see if there were hoof prints in the wet sand at the base of the rock. I didn't see anything. That spooked me more than the goat itself. The sand there was wet from waves splashing. If a goat had climbed down, I would expect to see some marks, but it was just smooth, shining sand. I looked around, scanning the rocks. I saw nothing. I felt a chill settle across my back. My arms felt shaky. I ended up reeling in my line, packing up my rod, and walking back to my car earlier than usual. I didn't want to admit it, but I had the creeps. I kept thinking, did I imagine that? But I knew I hadn't. My flashlight had shown me something very real, or at least it appeared real. I tried telling myself it was just a stray goat that got lost. That should have put me at ease, but I couldn't figure out how it would vanish so fast. I also couldn't stop picturing how bony it was, and how it seemed too aware of me. Over the next few nights, I tried to focus on my normal routine. I got up around midnight or 1 in the morning, threw my gear in the trunk and drove out. The coastline is dark at night and the roads have minimal lighting. There's a short stretch of single-lane road that leads to the small parking area near the beach. I usually park there, lock my car, and walk down a narrow path of sand and rocks. The path cuts around a natural bluff. If you keep going, you get to a wide section of rocks that juts into the water. That's where I like to fish. The second time I saw the goat, it was about a week after the first sighting. I had convinced myself the initial encounter was just some weird fluke. Maybe someone's goat escaped from a nearby farm. I told a buddy of mine about it, but he just laughed and said, "You were probably too tired and saw a stray dog or something." I almost believed him until that second time. It was around 2 in the morning. The water was calmer than usual. I was fishing from a lower rock closer to the water line. The tide was halfway out, and I kept my flashlight off to preserve my night vision. The faint glow of the sky was enough for me to see the tip of my rod. I was waiting for a nibble when I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like a soft crunch on the rocks, like something stepping. I flicked on my headlamp. My heart jumped into my throat. There was that black goat again, only now it stood even closer. It was on a rock maybe 5 or 6 feet from me. It turned its head slowly and I saw those same grayish eyes. It let out a low sound. It wasn't quite a bleat. It was more like a groan. The hairs on my neck went up. My skin prickled. I felt the muscles in my shoulders tense and my hand shook a little. Part of me wanted to go right up to it, but something in my gut told me not to. My mind was racing. I whispered something like, "What the hell is that goat doing here?" I tried to speak in a calm tone, but my voice came out shaky. The goat opened its mouth again, making that odd noise. Then it turned its body to the side, and I thought it might leap onto another rock. I shifted my headlamp to follow it. In that tiny moment, the goat was gone. I whipped my headlamp around, shining it in every direction. I saw nothing. There was no clattering of hooves on the rocks, no splashing of water, nothing. It just disappeared. I felt a sudden wave of pins and needles along my arms and hands. My forehead felt hot, but the rest of my body felt cold. I started to doubt my own senses. I mumbled to myself, "There's no way it can just vanish like that." But it was gone. My rod tip jerked at that moment and I realized I had a fish on the line. I reeled it in with shaky hands, a small snapper. I tossed it in the cooler, but my mind wasn't on fishing anymore. I didn't want to stay. There was this heaviness in my chest that made it hard to breathe right. I packed up my gear and left. The whole time, I kept turning around, half expecting to see that goat again. I tried to talk with a few fishermen I know, but nobody had a story about a black goat near the rocks. One older guy said sometimes goats or other animals wander down from the hills, but he admitted it was rare. Another friend teased me, calling it my imaginary goat. It started weighing on me. I went out less. When I did go, I felt constantly on edge. I'd shine my flashlight around more than usual. The night sounds of the waves and the wind that used to feel peaceful now made me uneasy. I even tried different spots for fishing, away from the rocks. But I always ended up going back because that rocky spot is where I catch the best fish. And part of me wanted to see the goat again, just so I could confirm I wasn't crazy. After about a month, I had nearly convinced myself that the goat was gone. Maybe it had been a stray that moved on. One night I decided to head out because the weather was good. It was around 1:30 in the morning when I parked. The walk to the shore was quiet, and I didn't see any movement on the beach. The tide was low, and the rocks were fully exposed. I stood near the edge, casting my line. The rhythmic sound of the waves calmed me a bit. I started to settle into that fishing mindset, where time slows down and I focus on the line, the rod, and the feel of the water currents. Then I heard it, a single bleat, or maybe that weird groan again coming from behind me. My stomach tensed up. I turned with my flashlight. The black goat stood there, this time even closer, maybe 4 feet away. I could see the shine of its eyes. Its fur looked a bit patchy around the shoulders. It stared at me, and my pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to chase it off, but my feet felt stuck. My mind was screaming to stay calm. I remember muttering, "What are you?" under my breath, not even sure why I said that. The goat made another noise, something that sounded like a wet cough. Then it moved 2 steps backward. I tried to keep the flashlight on it, but there was a moment when I glanced at my rod tip because I felt a slight tug. By the time I looked back, it was gone. I aimed my flashlight in every direction, but I saw nothing but rocks and water. I jumped across a small gap to check another rock shelf, thinking maybe the goat was there. I heard waves slapping against the stones, but no hoof sounds. I scanned the wet sand. No footprints. My legs felt weak. My heartbeat was too fast. My palms were sweaty. I couldn't stand being there. I cranked my reel, yanked my line in, and folded up my rod. My chest was tight. My breathing was shallow. I didn't even bother to store my gear properly. I just shoved everything into my bag and started back. As I walked away, I kept looking over my shoulder with the flashlight. Nothing moved behind me. I made it to the sand, then to the path that leads up to the parking area. It's a bit of a climb, and normally I do it without thinking. But this time, I felt like something was right behind me. I tried not to think about it, but every little sound made me jump. A couple of rocks tumbled in the dark, probably a crab or some shifting pebbles. I practically ran the last stretch. I slammed my trunk shut and locked the car doors once I got in. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I noticed my skin felt electric, like when you touch a live wire by accident and get a mild shock. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then I sat there, breathing hard, trying to calm down. The weird thing was, I didn't feel relief. I felt like the goat could still be there in the darkness watching. Since that night, I haven't seen the goat again. It's been a few weeks. I've tried going back to the same spot a couple of times, but I do it less frequently now. Each time I keep scanning around with my light. I stand there waiting to see if it appears on a rock or out of some dark corner. It never does. I guess I should be relieved, but a part of me isn't. A part of me wants closure or some explanation. If it's just a normal animal, why does it show up in these places that are so hard to reach? How does it move so quietly and disappear without leaving footprints? I don't have answers. Sometimes I think about how it stared at me. Those eyes didn't look wild. They looked calm, like it was checking me out. I can't forget how I felt. That prickling sensation along my arms and legs, the tightness in my chest, the way my mouth went dry. I've been in tense situations before. Once I got caught in a riptide while swimming, and I felt fear but also a rush of adrenaline. That goat gave me a different feeling. It was like an edge-of-your-seat alertness that didn't end even after it was gone. It lingered in my muscles, in my heartbeat, in my breathing. I still fish at night, but I'm more jumpy. The nighttime shoreline used to be comforting for me. The darkness and the sound of the water felt like a familiar shelter from everyday stress. Now I can't help scanning the area, worried that goat will be standing there. I'm sure some people would roll their eyes and say, it's just an animal. But something about its presence is unsettling, in a way I can't shake. That's the story. I wish I had a dramatic ending or a tidy explanation, but I don't. All I know is I saw a black goat on those rocks more than once, and each time it vanished without a trace. It felt too quiet, too deliberate, almost like it was there for a reason. I keep replaying those nights in my mind, trying to see if I missed some detail. But I never spot anything obvious. There's no trail in the rocks that a goat could easily climb. The sand doesn't hold any hoof prints. It just appears and disappears. It still bothers me, but I guess there's not much I can do about it. I'll keep fishing because that's what I do. And if the goat shows up again, maybe I'll try to get a better look. Or maybe I'll run. I honestly don't know. All I know is that every time I think about it, I get that same prickling feeling, like I'm wired with nerves that won't calm down. And that's that. I can't explain it. I only know what I saw. I checked into the hotel late on a Sunday night. My flight got delayed and I arrived feeling sore and impatient. The conference started early the next morning, so I just wanted to drop my bag, shower, and sleep. I didn't expect anything strange. I just wanted a quiet place to rest. The lobby had a dim light near the reception desk. The carpet looked faded, and there was a faint smell of old coffee. The receptionist glanced up, handed me a room key without much conversation, and pointed toward the elevators at the end of a narrow hallway. The elevator doors squeaked on the way up, and I felt the walls vibrating a bit. When the doors opened on my floor, I stepped into a corridor that was even more worn down than the lobby. The carpet had a dull red color with patches that were darker, maybe from years of footprints. The walls had old wallpaper peeling near the corners, and the lighting was weak. It gave the entire place a cramped and tired look. My room was at the very end of that corridor. Room 312. I turned the key, twisted the loose doorknob, and walked into a small space with a single bed, a desk, and a heavy wooden wardrobe. Everything looked old, but clean enough. The bedspread had a bland pattern, and the lighting inside was a single lamp on the nightstand. I dropped my suitcase near the wardrobe, slipped off my shoes, and sat on the bed. I could hear a low humming from the air conditioner in the window. It worked, so I was thankful for that. I showered in a cramped bathroom with chipped tiles on the floor. The water took a while to get hot. Afterward, I dried off, pulled on a t-shirt and boxers, then climbed into bed. I set my phone alarm for 6 in the morning. I needed to be ready for the conference by 8. The bed was firm, and the pillow was too thin, but I was tired, so I didn't care. I closed my eyes and fell asleep fast. On the first night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. It was abrupt, like my body sensed something wrong. At first, I didn't understand why I was awake. Then I heard it. There were heavy footsteps in the corridor moving up and down like someone marching. They didn't sound like normal steps. They were loud and even. I stared at the ceiling for a moment. My heart started beating a little faster. I wondered if it was another guest, maybe someone who was drunk or restless. I got out of bed, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was dark. The single overhead light was dim at best. I didn't see anyone. No shadows, no movement. The footsteps continued, but they sounded distant now, maybe near the other end of the corridor. I shrugged it off, thinking someone was pacing around. I went back to bed. It took a while, but I eventually fell asleep again. The next morning, I woke up groggy. The phone alarm startled me. I got dressed and headed down to the lobby for coffee. The place looked a little livelier in daylight. Other conference attendees were scattered around, picking up room keys or sipping coffee. I overheard people complaining about the outdated decor, but nobody mentioned strange footsteps. I brushed it off and told myself it was just late-night noise. I went about my day, attended the conference sessions, and tried to ignore the weird feeling I had about the hotel. That evening, I grabbed a quick dinner with colleagues, then returned to the hotel around 8. My colleagues were staying in different places, so I came back alone. I walked down the same narrow corridor to my room and noticed the carpet looked more worn than I had realized the night before. The lighting flickered a bit, and there was a musty odor. I unlocked my door, went inside, and decided to read through some conference material before bed. My plan was to sleep early, but I ended up scrolling through my phone for an hour or so. Around midnight, I forced myself to turn out the light. The bed squeaked as I rolled over. My body ached from sitting in conference chairs all day. I eventually dozed off. Then it happened again. This time it was around the same hour, about 2 in the morning. I heard those loud footsteps outside marching back and forth. They sounded like heavy boots. It was unsettling. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and stared at the door. My heart was racing. The sound stopped for a few seconds, then started again. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the door. I didn't even bother looking through the peephole. I opened the door carefully, trying not to make noise. The corridor was empty. No one was there. My eyes scanned the length of the hallway. The lights were still dim. There was an exit sign at the far end, but I didn't see any movement. The footsteps had stopped the moment I opened the door. I took a step into the hallway and heard the floor creak. It felt chilly out there, like a draft was coming from somewhere. I stood still for a few seconds, listening. Nothing. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My stomach felt tense. I didn't like this at all. The next morning, I went down to the front desk and asked the manager if anyone else had complained about nighttime noise. He just shook his head and said that sometimes old plumbing makes weird sounds. I explained that these were clearly footsteps, not pipes banging. He gave me a polite smile and said I was probably hearing another guest returning late. His tone was dismissive. I didn't argue. I just wanted him to note it in case it happened again. The third night I came back later than usual because I grabbed dinner and a few drinks with some people from the conference. I was still on edge about the footsteps. I wasn't exactly scared, but I felt uneasy, like something wasn't right on that floor. When I stepped out of the elevator, I thought I caught the scent of some strong perfume. It smelled floral, intense, like someone had just sprayed it. The corridor was empty, though. I didn't see anyone. I walked to my room, opened the door, and noticed that the smell didn't follow me inside. It stayed outside in the hallway. I decided to stay up later that night. I thought if it was a person, I could catch them in the act. I left the lamp on and sat at the desk. I tried to read some conference notes, but I was too distracted. My eyes kept darting to the door, waiting. Eventually, my eyelids got heavy. I checked the time. 1:50 a.m. I stood up, shook my arms, and tried to wake up a bit. A few minutes later, I heard the footsteps. They started softly, then got louder. They sounded like someone marching back and forth. I rushed to the door, yanked it open, and stepped into the corridor. No one was there, but the footsteps continued ahead of me, down the corridor, near the far end by the exit sign. I couldn't see anyone, but the footsteps were distinct. I took a few steps forward. My heart was pounding. The footsteps sounded like they were moving away. The corridor was dark. The overhead lights were dimmer in that part of the hall. I thought I saw a flicker of movement, but it might have been a shadow. Then the sound stopped. I stood there, my foot tapping nervously against the carpet. There was a rush of cold air that brushed against my face. I noticed that strong perfume smell again, like someone was standing next to me. But I didn't see anyone. My eyes scanned left and right. Nothing. I felt a tightness in my chest. My skin got clammy. I backed up slowly toward my door, then slipped back inside and locked it. I paced around my room for a good hour, trying to calm down. I kept looking at my phone, debating whether to call the front desk again. In the end, I decided not to. They'd just say the same thing. I barely slept that night. When my alarm rang at 6, I felt like I had barely closed my eyes. During the fourth day of the conference, I was distracted and tired. People asked if I was feeling sick. I just said I hadn't slept well. That evening, I almost considered switching hotels, but it was only one more night, and everything else nearby was booked because of the conference. I told myself I could get through one more night. I finished dinner with a colleague and got back to the hotel around 9. I forced myself to check the corridor more carefully. I walked slowly, looking around. The walls had old, dark stains, and the carpet felt uneven under my feet. The smell of old building materials and stale air was stronger than before. I got to my room, locked the door, and turned on every light. I also turned the TV on low volume for some background noise. I was determined to ignore any strange sounds. Around midnight, I started to doze off in the chair. My eyes were heavy, and my back was sore from the awkward position. I finally got up, turned off the TV, and went to bed. This time I tried not to think about the footsteps. I focused on counting backwards from 100, hoping it would distract me. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember was checking my phone to see it was nearly 2 in the morning again. My heartbeat was racing like I had been startled awake. I lay there, eyes open, waiting. My ears strained to catch any sound from the corridor. At first, there was nothing. Just the low hum of the air conditioner. Then I heard a faint step, just one. It was followed by a second, then a third. It sounded slow, deliberate, like someone testing the floor. I wanted to get up and check, but my hands felt sweaty, and my legs felt tense. Part of me wanted to hide under the blanket like a kid, but I was too uneasy to move. The footsteps paused. I heard a creak in the hallway, then silence. For a moment, I thought it might be over. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe slowly. Then the footsteps started up again, heading away toward the other end of the corridor. I decided I'd had enough. I threw off the blanket, grabbed my phone, and marched out of my room. The hallway light flickered, and the air felt cold against my face. The corridor looked empty again, but it smelled like that same heavy perfume. It was so strong that it almost made my eyes water. I walked down the hall, checking every single door I passed. They were all closed. No sign of light underneath the doors, no sign of movement. I reached the far end and tried the stairwell door. It was locked from the inside, but you could push the bar to exit to the stairs. I didn't hear anyone going down. I didn't see anyone on the steps. I felt this pressure in my head like my body was telling me something was off. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I turned around and headed back toward my room. When I got there, I paused. I looked over my shoulder one last time. The corridor was still and quiet. The perfume smell was gone. I went inside, locked the door, and sat on the bed in the dark. I listened for any more sounds. The next hour felt like forever, but I heard nothing else. I ended up leaving the TV on and dozing off with my back against the headboard. I slept for maybe 3 hours. The next day was my final day at the conference. I packed my suitcase and checked out that afternoon. When the manager asked if everything was okay, I just mumbled something about a rough time sleeping. He didn't pry. I didn't bring up the footsteps again. I was too tired to argue or ask more questions. I left that place feeling relieved to see bright sunlight outside. I got into a cab and went straight to the conference venue for the last sessions. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place in that hotel. Even now, when people ask about the trip, I tell them the conference was fine. I don't mention the footsteps right away, but if someone talks about weird hotel experiences, I bring it up. I tell them exactly what I heard. I don't have any explanation. Maybe it was just old pipes echoing through the corridors like the manager said. Maybe it was some guest playing a prank. But the perfume smell, the timing, and the fact that I never saw anyone still bother me. I don't jump to ghosts or anything like that. All I know is I heard those footsteps, I smelled that perfume, and I never saw who or what caused it. I was there for 4 nights, and it happened 3 times. That's all. I left the hotel feeling uneasy and tired, and I'm not interested in going back there anytime soon. That's the story. I don't have a grand conclusion or a big revelation. It was just an old hotel with narrow corridors, worn carpet, and noises in the middle of the night that I can't explain. I can't shake what happened. I went to visit a friend for a long weekend and something felt off from the moment I arrived. I'm not talking about loud noises or big dramatic events. I'm talking about small, creeping details that got under my skin and made me question everything around me. Now I'm back in my apartment and I keep picturing his pale face and those nights by the fig tree. I drove out early Friday morning. The road was empty, and I got there before lunch. I expected to see him out front with a big grin, waving me in. Instead, I found the gate half open and the yard deserted. I killed the engine and stepped out. My shoes sank into the gravel. The sun was strong, but the air felt heavy. There was a mild smell like damp soil even though it hadn't rained. The house stood about 40 yards from the gate, and I saw some old trees and a worn path. I called his name, but I got no answer at first, so I walked to the front door and knocked. He opened the door slowly. He looked awful. His eyes were ringed with these deep, dark circles, and his skin looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. He forced a small smile and tried to sound normal. I asked if everything was okay, and he shrugged. He said he hadn't slept much and joked that maybe he was just overworked. I noticed something in the hallway behind him. Windows were all covered by thin curtains, even though it was midday. The place felt dim, almost gloomy. I asked if I could come in, and he stepped aside, motioning me to enter. Inside there was a faint, musty smell, like unwashed clothes mixed with stale air. I dropped my bag by the couch and asked him again if he felt all right. He brushed off the question, said he was just stressed, and offered me a glass of water. His hands shook a bit when he handed me the glass. I asked if he was sure about me staying for the weekend, and he said yes. He apologized for not greeting me outside. He blamed his headaches. I watched him rub his temples a couple of times as we talked. That first afternoon, we tried to act normal. We walked around the property. I had been there years ago, and I remembered the big fig tree near the old well. Back then, we'd sit under it in the shade. The well was still there, made of rough stones, and there were signs that the area around it was damp. Even though the soil looked dry a few yards away, that spot always seemed dark and slick. My friend kept glancing at it. He'd look for a second or two, then shift his gaze. He never said anything, but he looked uneasy. I heard him sigh once or twice. We went back to the house before sunset. We had dinner. Just some rice, beans, and meat he had in the fridge. He barely ate. He kept looking at the windows like he was waiting for something. I tried to make small talk about work or sports, but he gave me short answers. Once it got dark outside, the wind picked up. I heard rustling in the trees. The walls creaked. He started rubbing his forehead again. He said he might need to lie down early. I watched him get up from the table and walk to his room without another word. I sat there alone for a bit, trying to decide if I should leave, but I figured he just needed rest. So I cleaned the dishes, turned off the lights in the kitchen, and made my way to the guest room. His house was quiet at night, except for the occasional sound of old wood settling. Around midnight, I woke up because I heard footsteps outside in the yard. They were slow and uneven. I got up, slid on my shoes, and opened the back door. The air was cold. The sky was clear, and I could see stars. I followed the sound around the side of the house until I reached the yard area near the well. He was there, standing with his back to me. I called his name. He turned his head slightly, but didn't really look at me. He was mumbling something, but I couldn't make out the words. I got closer and realized he was repeating short phrases that didn't make sense, like fragments of thoughts. I heard something like, "Can't see, it's coming, not again." It was unsettling because his voice was low and shaky. I tried to touch his shoulder, but he pulled away. His eyes were open, but he didn't look fully awake. He stared at the tree and then at the ground, as if he was lost. I asked if he was sleepwalking. He didn't respond. He just stood there muttering. I felt a chill on my arms. I looked around to see if there was any kind of light or shape in the darkness. All I saw was a thin, wispy line in the air near the trunk of the fig tree. It looked like steam from a kettle, only it was drifting too slowly to be steam. I caught a faint odor, like something was burning. It wasn't strong, but it was there. My friend suddenly stumbled forward, and I grabbed his arm before he fell. He woke up a bit then, blinking hard. He asked what I was doing out there. I asked him the same thing. He rubbed his face, said he was confused, and that he couldn't remember leaving his bed. He looked around and noticed the tree and the well. He frowned like he was annoyed at himself. Then he said we should head back inside. His voice was weak. He couldn't walk straight at first, so I had to hold his elbow. When we got back inside, he asked me not to mention it anymore. He said he'd been having strange episodes, but that they would pass. He left me alone in the living room and locked himself in his room. The next morning, we avoided the topic. We had a quick breakfast, but neither of us spoke much. He kept looking out the window toward the well. At one point, I asked him about last night. He said he didn't remember. He only recalled some weird dreams. I told him what I saw, and he got tense. He said I should leave if I felt uneasy. I told him I was worried. He sighed and said something about the land being heavy. He didn't use that exact word at first, but it was close to it. Then he repeated it in a tired voice. "It's heavy here, man. This place is no good sometimes." I didn't know how to respond. I felt a pressure in my chest, like I was in a place where I didn't belong. But I had driven all that way, and I didn't want to abandon him. So I said I'd stay, at least until Sunday. We spent the rest of the day fixing small things around the house. I tried to keep him busy, hoping it would distract him. We cleaned some gutters, patched a hole in a fence, and raked leaves. He seemed okay when the sun was up. He even cracked a joke now and then. But as soon as late afternoon rolled around, he got quiet again. His eyes would drift toward the fig tree, and he'd pause in the middle of whatever he was doing. I asked if something happened there recently, but he said no. He looked away and mumbled that he didn't want to talk about it. That night after dinner, I stayed up later. I brought my phone out to the porch and tried to relax, but I kept glancing at that tree. The moon was out, so I could see the silhouette of the branches. The well was just a dark spot next to it. Then I noticed something faint near the trunk, like a thin haze. I leaned forward and tried to focus. It wasn't moving much. It just hovered near the ground. I felt a slight breeze, but that haze didn't dissolve or blow away. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked down the steps. The grass was damp. My friend was nowhere in sight, and the house behind me looked dark except for one light in the hallway. As I got closer to the tree, I heard a rustling sound. It wasn't the wind. It was like someone was lightly brushing leaves together. I crept closer until I was a few steps from the trunk. The haze looked like a thin smoke. It had a light gray color, almost transparent. I sniffed the air, but only caught that same faint burning smell I noticed the previous night. My stomach clenched. I crouched, trying to see if there was a fire or embers on the ground. There was nothing visible. The soil looked moist. I took one more step and then I felt dizzy. It hit me fast, like when you stand up too quickly. My vision blurred and I swayed. I backed away, breathing hard. My chest felt tight. I hurried back to the porch and sat on the steps until my head cleared. I felt sweat on my forehead and a cold shiver running down my arms. I stayed out there, trying to calm down. Then I heard a creak from inside. My friend opened the door. He looked tired. He asked if I had gone near the tree. I admitted I had. He told me not to do that again. His voice was firm, not quite yelling, but close. Then he said something like, "I'm not kidding. You shouldn't go there. It gets worse if you do." I asked what he meant, but he wouldn't explain. He just stood there, breathing heavily, then turned around and walked back in. I went inside too, but I couldn't sleep. I felt the dizziness lingering, like a hangover. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tree and the thin smoke. Around 2 a.m, I heard low mumbling again. I jumped out of bed. My heart was pounding, and I had that nervous buzz under my skin. I checked the hallway and saw his bedroom door open. His bed was empty. The front door was ajar, letting in a slice of moonlight. I hurried outside. He was by the tree again. This time, he was touching the trunk, running his hand over the bark as if he was looking for something. His shoulders were hunched and his head was bowed. I walked up behind him and asked if he was awake. He didn't respond. I could hear him mumbling the same words as before. I grabbed his arm, but he kept staring at the trunk. I started to pull him away. That's when he turned around, eyes glassy and wide. He told me to let him go. His tone was sharp, almost angry. I froze. Then he staggered backward, like he lost his balance. I caught him under the arm and he snapped out of it. He recognized me, looked around, and saw the smoke. It was thicker now, drifting near his ankles. He grimaced like he was sick to his stomach. I led him away, supporting him while he stumbled. Once we reached the porch, he gasped for breath. I noticed his forehead was slick with sweat, and he looked ready to collapse. We went inside, and he sank onto the couch. He apologized over and over. He insisted he had no idea what was happening. He said he thought he might be losing his mind. I told him we should get help, maybe call a doctor. He shook his head. He kept saying it wouldn't matter, that something was wrong with the land. "It's not me," he muttered. "It's this place." I asked how long it had been going on. He said it started a few months ago, just occasional headaches and weird dreams. Then he began feeling dizzy around the well in the tree. Sometimes he'd wake up outside, not sure how he got there. He insisted the property was Karagata and that I should leave for my own good. I didn't sleep much after that. By morning, I had a headache of my own. The air felt stale, and even the sunlight didn't make me feel better. My friend barely said a word during breakfast. He suggested I pack my things and go before dark. I looked at him and saw how exhausted he was. He had trouble keeping his eyes open, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. I asked if he'd come with me to see a doctor. He refused. He said he had to stay. He said the place was in his name, and he couldn't just abandon it. I argued, but he wasn't hearing it. He walked off toward his room and closed the door. I stepped outside to get some air. The day was bright, and the sky was clear. I walked toward the well out of curiosity, but I didn't see the smoke. Everything looked normal, just the same old fig tree and that round stone well. The ground felt cool under my shoes. I stood there for a moment, thinking about how calm it seemed in daylight, yet how unsettling it became at night. I felt a small swirl of nausea in my gut, like my body was warning me to leave. The silence felt thick, and I sensed my own heartbeat in my ears. I made up my mind to go. I wasn't doing him any good by staying. In fact, I might have been making things worse. So I packed my bag, threw it in my car, and then found him on the porch. He was sitting in a rickety chair, eyes half closed. I told him I was going to head out. He just nodded. He tried to smile but couldn't. I asked him one last time to come with me. He shook his head, said he'd be fine. I didn't believe him, but I respected his decision. I felt a knot in my throat when I realized he was probably going to stay alone out there, night after night. I drove off. As I passed the gate, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw him standing in the yard, his posture slouched, his face turned toward the fig tree. I couldn't see his expression clearly, but I guessed he was lost in thought. I kept driving, trying not to look back again. My mind was jumbled with questions I couldn't answer. I just knew I felt relief when the dirt road merged with the main highway and I saw more cars around me. I've been back home for a few days now. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the shadows in my bedroom, half expecting to see that thin smoke. I have no real explanation for it. I don't know if it was some kind of gas from underground or a reaction to mold or something else in the soil. I only know how it felt. It felt real, and it felt dangerous. I keep thinking about him out there, pacing in the yard and waking up in the middle of the night. I hope he's okay. I'm worried I made a mistake by leaving him alone. But I also know I couldn't handle another night in that place. That's all I can really say about it. I've never experienced anything like that before, and I'm not sure I want to again. I never thought a cheap painting from a local bazaar could leave me feeling so unsettled. I collect old artwork as a hobby. I like browsing thrift stores and garage sales for pieces that others overlook. Most of the time, I just enjoy the hunt. I go in, look around, grab something that catches my eye, and then head home without giving it much thought. On a Saturday afternoon about a month ago, I walked into a small charity sale on the east side of town and spotted a frame leaning against a table. It was a painting of an autumn landscape with faded oranges, yellows, and browns. It looked old. The glass protecting it was dusty, so I bent down and wiped it a bit with the cuff of my jacket. I saw that the scene wasn't too detailed, but it had a certain mood that felt calm. It was cheap, and I thought it might look nice in my living room. So I bought it, handed the cashier $10, and left without asking any questions. When I got home, I put the painting on my coffee table. I studied the brushstrokes. They were thick in some areas, thin in others. There were small patches where the paint looked cracked, like little lines branching out in random patterns. I assumed it was just normal aging from an old canvas. The frame was wooden, with a few scratches on the sides. It smelled a bit musty, like it had been in a basement or attic for years. I shrugged it off. It was just another old piece of art with some history. I walked around my apartment trying to decide where to hang it. My living room walls are white, so I thought the fall colors would pop. I drilled a small hook into the wall above my couch and carefully placed the painting there. I stepped back, checked if it was crooked, then adjusted it a bit. It looked fine, just a standard old landscape painting. Nothing about it screamed unique. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a drink, and sat on my couch to admire my new find. A few hours passed and I didn't notice anything special. I turned on the TV, made dinner, and eventually went to bed. The next evening, I was reading on my couch. The sun was setting outside, and a little bit of light was hitting the painting. I looked up, and something felt off about the leaves in the painting. They seemed darker, almost like they had lost some of their bright orange color. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was the angle. I got up, walked closer, and leaned in. I still saw that the leaves weren't as vibrant as before. I turned on a lamp near the painting to see if it was just a trick of the dim light. Under the lamp, the color seemed slightly different from what I remembered. Still, it wasn't drastic. I decided I was probably imagining it. Sometimes old paint changes color under certain lighting conditions. I took a quick photo with my phone to compare the next day and went back to reading. The following morning, I checked the painting again. It looked the same as it did the day I bought it. The oranges and yellows were back to normal. I flipped through the photos on my phone. The difference was barely noticeable, so I dismissed it as my eyes playing tricks on me. I went to work, came home in the afternoon, and everything seemed fine. By the end of that week, though, the feeling of something being off started growing. I would look at the painting in the evening, and the leaves looked a bit wrinkled or shriveled in places. I felt a bit uneasy, like I was noticing something I couldn't explain. But I tried to stay rational. Old paintings can behave strangely under changing light. Maybe it had something to do with the temperature or humidity in my apartment. One day, I arrived home around 4 in the afternoon, which was earlier than usual. There was a sliver of sunlight coming through the window. It hit the painting at a sharp angle, and I saw a tiny figure way in the background of the scene. The figure was barely taller than half a centimeter. It looked like a person standing under a tree. I squinted and thought, I don't remember seeing that before. My heart picked up speed. I leaned in. The figure had a faint outline, but I couldn't make out details like clothing or facial features. It was more like a blurry shape. I grabbed my phone and tried to snap a photo. The sunlight shifted, and a second later I couldn't see that little figure at all. I stared for a while, tilting my head, adjusting my phone's angle, but the figure was gone. I walked away feeling a slight chill. My hands felt tense and a weird sensation settled in my stomach. I caught myself thinking this was some strange optical illusion. I turned on all the lights in the living room and got as close as I could, but nothing was there. I tried to ignore it, but my mind kept going back to that weird shape. I told myself to focus on something else, so I made dinner, checked my emails, and watched some online videos to relax, but I couldn't stop glancing at the painting. That night, around 7, I turned off the main lights, leaving only a small table lamp on. I studied the painting from my couch. The leaves definitely looked more twisted than they had in the morning. I swear I saw more little cracks in the paint than before. My chest felt tight. I got up and ran my finger gently over the surface, but the glass was smooth. I heard no crinkling of paint. It felt solid. I took a second photo with my phone and compared it to the morning shot. I convinced myself that maybe the difference was in my head. It was subtle. The texture in the pictures was almost the same. But something in my gut told me there was a shift happening. I felt anxious enough that I had trouble falling asleep. Over the next week, the sensation that the painting was changing kept getting stronger. I didn't see the little figure again, but I noticed that every evening after 6, the colors seemed dull. The browns looked muddy. The oranges looked more like russet or rust. My heart would pound each time I walked by. It didn't feel right. I took more photos, tried to compare them in various lighting conditions. Nothing was obvious, but I still felt unsettled. I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave it on my wall or throw it out. Yet I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself to calm down, that I was fixating on this for no reason. One Thursday I came home and decided to ignore the painting. I didn't look at it for hours. I made dinner, ate in the kitchen, watched a game on TV, and tried to keep my focus elsewhere. Around 8, I walked to the living room and froze when I saw a faint crack in the paint, near the center where the tree trunks were. I swear it hadn't been there earlier. It was long and thin, running diagonally for a few centimeters. I grabbed my phone and took a photo right away. I tapped the screen to zoom in. It wasn't my imagination. The crack looked real. I felt my pulse in my neck. My hand started shaking. I took a closer look at the painting with a flashlight. The crack looked like a small fault line, branching a bit at the ends. But when I touched the glass, there was no bump. I couldn't feel the crack. It looked like it was in the paint beneath the glass. The next morning I checked the painting at around 9. The crack was gone. It wasn't faint. It wasn't smaller. It was just not there. I took another photo and put it side by side with the one from the night before. The night photo clearly showed that crack. The morning photo showed a smooth patch of paint. I felt a jolt of panic. I rubbed my eyes. I wondered if I had taken a photo of some random spot on the painting, but the trees were in the exact same position. It was the same area. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. My stomach tensed, and I had to walk around my apartment a few times to calm down. That day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept replaying the image of the crack in my head. I considered the possibility that maybe I was photographing different parts of the painting, or that the glass had some reflection causing the illusion. But it matched too well. I had the 2 photos right there on my phone, one with a visible crack, one without. By Friday evening, I decided to try an experiment. I set up a small camera on a tripod in my living room, pointed right at the painting. I turned off any bright lights except for a lamp in the corner. I hit record on the camera and left it there. I sat on my couch, phone in hand, feeling nervous. My left foot kept tapping the floor. My mouth went dry. At some point, I realized I was sweating, so I turned on a fan, but I didn't take my eyes off the painting. I sat there for an hour. Nothing changed. The leaves stayed dark, the paint looked old, but I didn't see any dramatic shifts. I felt myself getting frustrated and a little scared. Around 8:30, I noticed a slight movement in the reflection on the glass, like a flicker of light. I got up and walked closer, but I heard nothing unusual. I stood there, studying the surface. Then I saw the crack appear again, very slowly over a span of about 20 seconds. It was like a faint line forming in the background of the paint. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I clenched my jaw. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My camera was still recording behind me, so I felt a moment of relief, thinking, finally, proof. I leaned in, maybe 8 inches from the painting. The crack reached from near the top of one tree trunk down to the base of another. I swore I heard a faint scratch, but I can't be sure if it was in my head. I stopped the recording after a few more minutes. I replayed the footage, but the video was grainy under the dim lamp, and it was hard to see anything conclusive. I cursed under my breath. It just showed me standing up and staring at the painting. I could make out a slight line if I paused at just the right moment, but it wasn't crystal clear. I felt a rush of anger and fear. My heart was beating so hard it made my chest ache. When I woke up on Saturday, I checked the painting again. The crack wasn't there. The leaves were bright again. I felt a wave of nausea. My hair stood on end. I couldn't explain any of it. I snapped a fresh photo. It matched what I saw in person. No crack. I turned on the lamp, closed the curtains, tried to recreate the same evening setup. Nothing changed. It stayed intact during the day. I ended up turning off the camera. I didn't know what else to do. Over the next few days, I kept glancing at the painting whenever I passed by. My appetite suffered. I found myself eating less and pacing around the living room. My neck and shoulders felt stiff. Every time the sun went down, the painting took on that dull look. The leaves lost their bright hue, and the cracks sometimes showed up, sometimes didn't. I never saw the little figure again, but I kept feeling a presence in the background. Sometimes I thought I saw a shadow near the horizon line. Then I'd stare long enough to doubt my own eyes. I stayed up later and later, trying to catch changes on camera, but my recordings were never obvious enough to share with anyone. I didn't even know who I would show them to. It just looked like a normal painting in shaky nighttime footage. A few days ago, I decided to stow the painting in my closet. I took it off the wall and leaned it against some boxes. My living room looked empty without it, but I felt a bit of relief not seeing it all the time. However, last night when I walked by my closet, I smelled something musty that made me think of old paint and wood. I opened the door and stared at it in the dark. I couldn't see any changes, but my heart started racing again. I quickly closed the door and tried to push it out of my mind. I don't have an explanation. All I know is the painting acts strange at night. The cracks appear and vanish. The colors fade and return. There was a shape in the background once, but it came and went. I've tried to reason it out. Maybe the paint is sensitive to temperature or humidity. Maybe the glass is warped or the old frame has some effect under certain angles of light. Still, my gut tells me something else is going on. I haven't had the nerve to toss it out. Part of me thinks it's just an old piece of art, and I'm getting worked up over nothing. Another part of me feels nervous whenever I think about it. My palms get clammy. My stomach gets tight. My breathing gets quick. For now, I keep the painting in that closet. I still check it once in a while, just for a few seconds. I see the same autumn scene. Sometimes it looks perfectly normal. Sometimes I see faint lines that might be new cracks. It's never straightforward. I don't talk about it with friends or family. I'm not sure they'd believe me anyway. I might bring it to an art restorer at some point just to see if there's some chemical explanation. But a tiny voice in my head whispers that there's something more to it than that. And I'm not sure I'm ready to find out. I never expected my night to take such a sharp turn. One moment I was driving along a quiet highway after visiting my parents, and the next I was standing on the shoulder, staring at the sky, wondering if I was losing my mind. I'm still not sure what I saw. It was around 10 at night and the road was empty. I had maybe 2 hours of driving ahead. I felt tired, but I wasn't nodding off or anything. I just wanted to get home, drink some water, and crash into bed. Yet the events that followed changed the whole tone of the drive. I had left my parents' place a bit later than usual. We'd had dinner and I stuck around for coffee and some cake. My mom always insists I eat more, and I usually give in. I felt full and slightly bloated. My dad told me to watch out for deer on the highway because he'd heard stories from neighbors. I said I would, threw my bag in the trunk, and headed out. The first hour of my drive was straightforward. Nothing but darkness, a few streetlights near small towns, and then back to the darkness again. The sky was pretty clear. I could see stars through my windshield whenever the overhead lights thinned out. I noticed a soft rattling noise from my car's front left side. It started off faint, then got a bit louder. At first, I thought maybe it was a loose piece of plastic under the hood. I tried ignoring it, but it kept getting on my nerves. I was about 50 miles from any major city, stuck in this rural stretch with fields and a few patches of forest around. There were no nearby gas stations or rest stops, so I decided to pull over onto the shoulder. I figured I'd check under the hood, see if anything was obviously out of place. I put on my hazard lights and eased the car onto the gravel. I heard crunching under the tires as I braked. The engine idled with a low hum, and I felt the vibration through the steering wheel. The night air was cooler than I expected. I shut off the car to hear better, stepped out and popped the hood. There were no street lights, so I used the flashlight on my phone. I could see the belts and hoses. Nothing looked torn or broken. I jiggled a few things, checked the oil level, and it all seemed fine. I felt a bit of relief, but I also felt unsettled by the isolation. The only sounds were insects, a soft breeze through the trees, and my own breathing. I closed the hood and took a second to look around. The land to my left was mostly flat farmland, and to my right there was a row of tall trees. They formed a dark outline against the sky. The silence felt heavy. Normally I'd see at least one car or a truck passing by, but there was nothing. It was just me out there. I rubbed my arms because I felt a slight chill. I walked to the passenger side door, thinking about grabbing a jacket. That's when I caught a glimpse of some lights above the treetops. At first I thought it was an airplane. The lights were white, not blinking, just steady. There were 3 of them, spaced apart, forming what looked like an upside-down triangle. They were far above the trees, but not moving like a normal plane. They seemed too still. I leaned against my car, trying to figure out if they were moving at all. After a few seconds, I noticed the slightest shift in their positions, almost like a slow drifting. It was subtle, but I was sure I saw it. There was no engine noise, no drone hum. The only thing I heard was my own breathing and the distant sound of wind. I felt my heartbeat thumping in my chest. My stomach tightened. I kept staring, waiting for them to blink or do something normal, like crossing the sky. But they didn't blink. They glowed with a faint, consistent brightness. The shape looked too perfect to be random stars. I wondered if it was some new kind of aircraft, maybe a military project. I tried to make sense of it. My phone was in my hand, but for some reason, I just stood there. My mind locked onto the lights. I felt a knot in my throat. My mouth went dry. After maybe a minute, I remembered my phone had a camera. I scrambled to open the camera app, but my hands were shaky. I aimed at the sky, trying to zoom in. On the screen, I couldn't see anything but darkness. I fiddled with the brightness settings, but it didn't help. The phone wasn't picking up the lights in detail. I switched to video mode, but by the time I did, something changed in the sky. The 3 lights moved closer together until they became one single point of light. It happened in less than a second, like they merged into a single source. There was no sound, no flash, just a quick shift from 3 to 1. My heart raced and I felt a rush of adrenaline in my arms. They felt almost numb. Then, in a burst of motion, that one light shot straight across the sky. It covered an impossible distance in a fraction of a second, then vanished behind the tree line. I barely caught the movement in my peripheral vision. There was no roar, no sonic boom, nothing. It was just gone. My phone was still in my hand, pointing uselessly. I had no footage. I had no evidence. I stood there breathing hard, eyes scanning the sky. I felt sweat on my forehead. My shirt clung to my back. The wind felt colder. My arms had goosebumps. I checked the time on my phone. Only a few minutes had passed since I'd stopped. I wanted to call someone, maybe my mom or a friend, but I hesitated. What would I say? I saw lights in the sky that formed a triangle, then zipped away. It sounded ridiculous. People see weird things all the time. Most of the time, it's just a trick of the eyes or a simple explanation. But my gut told me this was different. I hadn't been dozing off. I knew what I saw. My mind went to drones, experimental aircraft, or some strange atmospheric event. But none of that felt convincing. The silent speed, the way the lights merged, the absence of any blinking. It didn't match anything I'd known. I took a deep breath, got back in my car, and locked the doors. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I tried starting the engine. For a moment, nothing happened. I actually felt my pulse spike, thinking my car was dead, but then it roared to life. I sighed in relief. I turned off the hazard lights and pulled back onto the highway, checking the rearview mirror as if something would appear behind me. The road was still empty. My headlights lit up the asphalt in front of me, but everything else was dark. As I drove, I kept glancing at the sky. My heart rate slowly went down, but I remained on edge. A part of me hoped to see those lights again, just to confirm I wasn't imagining things. Another part of me was terrified at the thought of them reappearing. My shoulders felt tight and my jaw was clenched. I tried turning on the radio for some noise, but the reception was lousy. I only got static and faint voices. I turned it off. Silence felt more comfortable than static. I wanted to process what had happened. Every few miles I saw exit signs, but they were for tiny farm roads or local routes. I didn't want to wander around in unfamiliar areas. I decided to keep going until I reached a bigger town or a rest stop. I kept replaying the sight of those three lights in my head. I remembered how they formed a perfect triangle and how they merged into one. I tried to recall if I heard anything at all. Not a single buzz or hum. Nothing. It was like they were in a vacuum. I also tried to remember if there was any change in the air. Did I feel wind picking up? Did I sense heat or static electricity? Nothing stood out. It was just silent and dark. Eventually, I saw a small rest area. It was lit by a few lampposts and had a vending machine near some bathrooms. I pulled in. There was no one else around, just a couple of parked cars that looked like they'd been left there for the night. I parked under one of the lights and turned off the engine. My legs felt stiff when I got out. My back was tense and I stretched a bit. I walked over to the vending machine to get a bottle of water. My hands felt steadier, but my mind was still racing. I paid for the water and drank half of it in one go. It tasted lukewarm, but I didn't care. I needed to hydrate. My throat felt parched. I stood there, looking at the empty lot. The sky here was still clear. I could see a lot of stars, but no odd lights. A flickering bug zapper near the bathroom made a slight buzzing sound. A moth hit it, and I heard a brief sizzle. I flinched. My nerves were shot. I took another sip of water and leaned against the vending machine, trying to make sense of everything. My phone showed a few bars of signal, so I considered calling someone. But I didn't want to start a conversation about strange lights. Instead, I just opened a messaging app and typed a short note to a friend. "You won't believe what I just saw." Then I erased it, deciding to keep this to myself for now. I got back in my car and sat there for a while with the door open, letting the night air in. I kept expecting a car to pull up or a truck to roar by, but the lot stayed empty. The overhead light in my car revealed the tension on my face in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked tired, but alert. My mind was jumping between curiosity and doubt. Maybe it was some advanced military drone. The shape could have been some kind of formation flight. The speed might have been a trick of perspective. But then I remembered the absolute silence and the way the lights merged. It didn't add up. I eventually closed the door, turned the key, and got back on the highway. The rest of the drive felt long. My grip on the wheel was tighter than usual. My eyes darted to the horizon from time to time. I just wanted to see headlights of another car, any sign of life. After about 30 minutes, I did see a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror, but whoever it was didn't catch up to me. They were too far behind. It was enough to remind me I wasn't alone in the world, though. When I finally reached the outskirts of my city, I breathed a heavy sigh of relief. Streetlights lined the road, and there were cars at stoplights. I felt some of the tension lift. I pulled into a gas station, filled up, and checked my tires again. The rattling noise hadn't returned. Maybe whatever it was had been a piece of debris stuck somewhere. I didn't care at that point. I just wanted to get home. I parked in my usual spot near my apartment building and sat there for a moment, engine off, keys in my hand. The night felt different than usual. The city lights and the distant sound of traffic gave me a sense of normality, but I couldn't shake the memory of those 3 lights. My heart still beat faster when I thought about it. I got out of the car, grabbed my bag, and headed upstairs. My apartment was quiet and slightly stuffy. I tossed my bag on the couch and went straight to the sink for a glass of water. My hands were still a bit shaky, but not as bad as before. I wanted to shower and go to bed, but I also felt a strong urge to do some quick research. I opened my laptop and searched for recent UFO sightings in that area. I skimmed through a few results. Most were vague or had no real evidence. Some people reported triangular lights, but I couldn't find anything specific to that exact time or location. I clicked around for maybe 20 minutes, then gave up. My eyes were tired. My muscles felt heavy. I shut down my laptop, stripped off my clothes, and took a quick shower. I stood under the water trying to relax. Images of those lights kept flashing in my mind. After I dried off and pulled on a pair of shorts, I flopped onto my bed. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the day. I still had no explanation. All I could do was replay the events piece by piece and wonder if it could have been something normal. But the speed and silence still seemed unreal. I didn't hear any aircraft that quiet in my life. I turned onto my side and tried to get comfortable. My mind was racing, but eventually, exhaustion took over. I drifted off to sleep with the lingering thought that I'd seen something I couldn't define. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained. My back ached and I had a mild headache. I forced myself out of bed, got dressed, and went about my usual routine. As the day went on, I tried to bring it up to a coworker, just a casual mention of, "I saw something strange on the highway last night." Their reaction was polite confusion. I backed off and changed the topic. I didn't want to push it. I realized that without footage or another witness, I just had my word. I could already imagine the jokes or the eye rolls, so I kept quiet. Even now, I think about those lights every so often. I drive that same route to visit my parents, and I can't help but look at the sky. I haven't seen anything like it again. That one night, though, felt too real to dismiss. I still don't know if it was some secret tech or a rare atmospheric event. All I know is that it happened in front of me on that lonely stretch of road. I wish I had more proof, but I don't. That's the end of it. I saw 3 lights become one and shoot off silently. It lasted only a few minutes, but it's burned into my memory, and that's all I can say about it. I remember the day I saw him again, clear as any memory I've got. It felt like catching sight of a ghost, but it was just a guy I used to see every week at the gym. He was standing by the front entrance in his old hoodie, staring inside like he was trying to figure out if he should go in or not. That got me right away. He looked exactly the same as before, but he wasn't moving. He didn't smile or nod. He just stared. It pulled me in because I recognized him and thought, where the hell has he been? He vanished months ago without a word. I'd been thinking about him on and off since he dropped off the face of the earth. He used to come to the gym regularly, run on the treadmill, do some weights, crack a few jokes with the guys. Then one day, he was gone. Someone said he moved. Another person said he gave up on working out. None of us had proof. He wasn't on social media anymore. He didn't answer calls. I texted him once or twice, got no reply. Eventually, I just moved on. Then, out of nowhere, there he was. When I saw him standing by the door that afternoon, I felt a jolt in my chest. My lungs felt tight, like I was surprised, but also a bit concerned. I walked up to him, said his name, tried to get his attention. He turned his head toward me, but didn't speak. I remember looking at his face. His eyes looked tired, and his cheeks seemed a bit thinner. But he wasn't sick-looking exactly. He just looked distant. He gave me a quick glance, then turned away and walked toward the street. I followed him, calling out, "Hey man, where have you been?" He didn't stop, didn't even slow down. He crossed the road, and I tried to get close enough to tap him on the shoulder or something. The traffic was light, so I thought I could keep up. But as soon as I reached the other side, he was gone. I looked right and left. There was an intersection. I checked to see if he'd turned. Nothing. It felt weird because I was sure he couldn't have gotten far. I jogged to the corner, looked down the block. I didn't see him. There wasn't a store open there. No car door slamming shut. No engine starting. He just wasn't there. I stood there for a while, checking the sidewalk, thinking maybe he ducked into some doorway. I felt uneasy. My stomach was tense. My forehead was sweaty and not from exercise. I knew what I saw. I wasn't imagining it. He had been right in front of me. Then suddenly he wasn't. I went back to the gym feeling a little off balance. One of the employees at the front desk asked me if everything was okay, because I guess I looked rattled. I told him I thought I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time, but the guy disappeared. He shrugged and said something like, "Happens to me sometimes. Maybe it was just a look-alike." I couldn't explain properly, so I just nodded. The next day I showed up at the gym around the same time. I wanted to see if this guy would appear again. I wasn't expecting anything, but I just felt compelled to check. I was standing outside, scanning the sidewalk. I didn't see him. I felt a bit disappointed, so I went inside and tried to focus on my workout. Halfway through my routine, one of the front desk attendants came up to me and said, "Hey, I saw your buddy from yesterday." I dropped the dumbbell I was holding and turned to him, my heart kicking up a beat. I said, "Where did he go?" The employee shrugged and said he was standing near the windows at the front. He didn't come in, didn't talk to anyone, then he just walked away. I put down my stuff and hurried to the entrance. There was no sign of him. I stepped out, checked up and down the street. Nothing. This was the second time in 2 days. It made me frustrated. It wasn't normal. My palms felt clammy. I felt a slight shake in my fingers. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was a jumpy feeling I couldn't ignore. There was something about his behavior. It was cold, weird, and so quiet. After that, I decided to reach out to some mutual friends. I started with a guy we both used to chat with sometimes in the locker room. He said he hadn't heard from him in a long time. We talked about the last time we'd seen the missing friend. He told me that after he dropped out of the gym, he never answered calls or texts. He also confirmed the rumors that the guy had deleted his social media, but he didn't know any real reason for it. It was all guesswork. Maybe a new job, maybe problems at home, but nothing specific. Then I tried another friend who used to run with him on the track. She said the same thing. No contact for a long time. I started feeling uneasy. People don't usually drop off the grid completely like that. But I also knew it happens. Some people isolate themselves. They get tired of everything. They decide to vanish in a sense. But what was with this reappearance? If he wanted to be invisible, why keep showing up outside the gym? I went back to the gym the next evening, again around the same time. I kept an eye on the door every few minutes. I did some squats, did some push-ups, and took a break by the water fountain. My ears were tuned in to any sound that might indicate a commotion near the entrance. Every time the main door squeaked, I'd glance over. No sign of him. After finishing my workout, I walked out, feeling a mix of disappointment and relief. There was a small part of me that felt on edge. I didn't like feeling so wound up about a guy who might just be messing with me or dealing with his own stuff. The following week, I didn't see him at all. I kept asking around, but no one else had caught a glimpse. Some people laughed it off, saying maybe I was seeing someone who just looked like him. That irritated me because I knew what I saw. A few days later, I tried driving around the block after leaving the gym, thinking maybe I'd find him wandering. Nothing. Everything was normal out there. I went home feeling a bit foolish. I started to think maybe I should just let it go. If he didn't want to talk, that was his decision. But it nagged at me. I remembered his expression. It was so blank. I had never seen him look that detached before. He used to be social enough, or at least polite. Now it was like he didn't recognize anyone or care about anything. I also remembered how quiet he had been. No greetings, no explanations, no small talk. One evening I was talking to my girlfriend at home explaining this whole situation. She asked me if I'd checked with the gym staff more thoroughly. So I decided I would go during a quieter time and see if someone else had seen him. The next morning around 10 I showed up. The gym was less crowded. The main manager was there, a guy I knew reasonably well. I asked him if he'd seen our missing friend. He said he noticed a guy matching that description standing outside the glass doors a couple days ago, but the man never came in. He tried waving the guy in, thinking maybe he forgot his membership card or something. But the guy just turned around and left. The manager told me the security cameras only capture inside the building and right at the entrance. He offered to show me the footage to see if it was the same person. We checked. The footage was clear. The figure outside was definitely him. His face was partially turned away, but I recognized his posture and the shape of his jaw. In the video, he stood there for about a minute, and then walked out of the frame. My heart started beating harder as I watched. It confirmed I wasn't losing it. The manager said something like, "He doesn't seem hurt or anything. Maybe he just doesn't want to come back inside." That was true, but it didn't explain why he was hovering around the place for no reason. After that, I walked to a nearby coffee shop just to gather my thoughts. While sitting there, I found myself looking out the window, half expecting to see him pass by. I finished my coffee, got up and went back out. The air felt cold on my face. My arms were covered in goosebumps. I told myself it was the weather, but honestly, I was just on edge. I started trying to remember the last real conversation I'd had with him before he vanished. It was nothing major. We talked about workout routines and music. I couldn't recall anything that would make him want to cut everyone off. But I understood that people have private problems. Still, the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. About a week later, I had another sighting. I'd just finished a late workout. It was close to 9 p.m., and the streets outside were dimly lit. I walked to my car, which was parked a block away. As I approached, I saw a figure leaning against the wall near a closed convenience store. My chest tightened. I recognized his silhouette. I went closer, called out his name. He looked up at me but didn't move otherwise. I heard the faint sound of cars in the distance. My own footsteps were loud on the pavement. When I was about 10 feet away, I stopped. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. He was staring at me, but there was no warmth in his face. It was like a blank stare. I managed to say, "Hey man, what's going on? You okay?" He didn't answer. The silence was heavy. I noticed his jacket looked kind of worn, like he'd had it for years. His shoes were the same ones I remembered. My breathing felt thick. I asked, "Are you in some kind of trouble? We can talk." He still didn't respond. He just looked at me for a moment, then turned away and started walking down the sidewalk. I hesitated, then followed. I called out, "Wait!" My voice echoed off the empty storefronts. He didn't break his stride. I followed him around the corner, and just like before, he was gone. No open doors, no alleyway, no sign of him. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My arms tingled and I gripped my phone in my pocket. I felt my face getting hot. I checked up and down the street. Nothing. I listened for footsteps. Nothing. My ears picked up the hum of a distant streetlight, but that was it. I stood there, cursing under my breath. Then I went back to my car, looking over my shoulder every few seconds. My stomach was churning. I felt tense and uneasy. I decided I needed more information. I started visiting his old apartment building. I knew the general area. I waited outside a few times, checked the mailboxes, scanned the names. He wasn't listed anymore. I rang a few buzzers, trying to find any neighbor who remembered him. One person remembered him but said he moved out months ago. Didn't leave a forwarding address, just vanished. I asked if there was anything strange about his departure. The neighbor said not really. One day he was there, the next day he wasn't. That was all they knew. I left feeling restless. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the moments I'd seen him. That blank look on his face, how he disappeared so fast. It didn't make sense. It started to feel almost unnatural, but I stuck to the idea that there must be a rational explanation. Maybe he was dodging me. Maybe he was living on the streets or in some temporary place and didn't want to talk to anyone. Maybe he owed money or had personal issues. My mind went to 100 scenarios. Over the next month, I kept going to the gym, sticking to my usual routine. I didn't see him again for a while. I told myself to let it go, that he obviously didn't want contact. Still, a nagging feeling ate at me. Every time I got on the treadmill or lifted weights near the window, I'd glance outside, half hoping, half dreading that I'd see him. 2 weeks later, I caught him again. This time, it was early morning, around 6 a.m. I'd decided to hit the gym before work. There weren't many people around. I stepped out of my car in the dim light of dawn and I saw him standing across the street, facing the gym. My heart pounded. I shouted his name, loudly this time, my voice echoing in the still air. He turned his head slightly, but didn't move from his spot. I walked toward him, carefully crossing the street, checking for cars. I kept my eyes on him the entire time. I was afraid to blink. He looked at me. He blinked once, very slowly. I stopped a couple of feet away. I noticed he had dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept. His cheeks were drawn in. He looked thinner than before. I swallowed hard. I asked in a low voice, "Are you good? Do you need help?" He just stared. I heard the hum of a car passing behind me, the wheels rolling on the damp street. I felt sweat forming on my forehead, even though it was chilly. My breath came out in shallow huffs. I tried one last time. "We were friends, right? You can tell me if you're in trouble." Silence. He just kept looking at me. He wasn't even blinking much. I took a small step forward, lifting my hand a bit like I was going to reach out to him. But then he turned and walked off. This time, I followed, but I kept my distance. He walked down the block. I didn't say anything else. I just wanted to see where he was going. He reached the corner, rounded it. I stayed close, determined not to lose sight. But by the time I turned the corner, he was gone again. The street was empty. There wasn't even a car parked there. It was a wide open block with only a few shops, all closed at that hour. No sign of him. I felt a shiver go through my arms. My hands shook. I don't know how he managed to move that fast. It bothered me. It got under my skin. I spent the rest of that morning at the gym, but I couldn't focus. My workout was half-hearted. My thoughts kept going back to him. Why was he hanging around the gym? Why not talk? Why vanish the second I tried to get closer? It felt surreal, like dealing with a moving shadow. But it was him. Flesh and blood. Or at least that's what I believed. After that day, I didn't see him again for a long time. Weeks went by, then months. During that time, I tried calling his old number just out of habit. It was still disconnected. I reached out to every mutual contact I could think of, and nobody had heard anything new. Some people asked me if I was sure I wasn't mixing him up with someone else. I'd just say I knew it was him. I can't prove any of this beyond the security footage of him standing outside the gym. But that footage doesn't explain how he disappears so fast, or why he won't speak to me or anyone else. All I know is, he shows up from time to time, stares into the gym, and leaves without a word. Sometimes I think about waiting outside all day, just to catch him. But life goes on. I have work, obligations. He shows up on his own schedule without any pattern I can track. Every time I pass that front door, I find myself glancing around. My stomach tightens when I imagine seeing him again. Part of me wants answers, but part of me is almost afraid to know. What kind of explanation would make sense? He seems detached from everything, like he's there in body but not in mind. It's unsettling. I don't share this story much anymore. When I told a few people early on, some thought I was overreacting. Others thought it was interesting but dismissed it as a misunderstanding. I know what I saw. And I know I'm not the only one who spotted him. That gym employee confirmed it. The manager confirmed it. So he's out there. He's just not the same guy we knew. Maybe something happened that changed him. Maybe he just wants to watch from a distance. Even now, I catch myself checking over my shoulder whenever I leave the gym, especially at night. I look for someone in a hoodie, standing off to the side. I listen for footsteps. Sometimes I think I hear them, but when I turn around, there's no one there. It's been a while since the last time I actually saw him, but I won't be surprised if he shows up again, without warning, just standing there, silent as ever. And I'll probably try to talk to him again, try to figure it out. But something tells me he won't say anything. He'll just turn away and disappear, leaving me with that uneasy feeling in my gut all over again. I still remember the first evening I arrived at my cousin Alex's place. The sun was close to setting, and I stood on the edge of a dirt driveway, looking down into the deep valley ahead. The road wound its way along a steep cliff, with a rusty guardrail on one side and a sheer drop on the other. I felt uneasy before I even stepped into his house. The air was cool, and I heard the distant rumble of farm machinery somewhere in the hills. I shrugged it off, figuring I'd get used to the atmosphere soon enough. Alex's house sat on a small patch of land surrounded by tall grass and a few acres of scattered crops. The roof was tin, the walls were old wood, and there was a porch that creaked whenever you walked on it. He greeted me in the yard. He's about my height with broad shoulders and thick arms from years of farm chores. His handshake was firm. I'd always known him to be practical, never prone to nonsense. That night over dinner, we talked about the layout of his property. The farmland behind the house stretched toward a row of jagged hills, while the front yard led to a dusty trail that eventually connected to the main road. He warned me about that cliff road. He said it was easy to get distracted by the view and forget how narrow the path was. I went to bed in a small guest room on the house's south side. The walls were thin, and I could hear the sounds of the night outside. At first it was just crickets and the occasional rustling of leaves. Around midnight I heard a strange metallic clanging in the distance. It sounded like someone hitting an empty container with a heavy bar. It echoed through the valley in a pattern, like a slow set of beats. Clang, clang, clang. I sat up in bed. My heart pounded a bit. I wondered if maybe it was some old piece of machinery that turned on at a scheduled time. I tried to ignore it, but it kept going for a few seconds, then stopped. When it stopped, there was absolute silence. I lay awake, holding my breath, but the noise didn't return that night. The next morning, I mentioned the sound to Alex over breakfast. He was drinking coffee at the table, staring out the window at the rising sun. He shrugged and said he hadn't heard anything. He suggested it might be the mining operation a few miles away. They sometimes did late-night work involving trucks and metal parts. I didn't argue. It made sense. Farms, mines, and all kinds of mechanical equipment dotted these hills, so it didn't sound too far-fetched. Still, I couldn't shake how rhythmical it had been. It felt like something deliberate. I spent the day helping Alex with some simple chores. We fed the animals, patched a few holes in the barn roof, and cleared some tall weeds at the edge of the property. While I worked, I kept looking up at the rocky hills and the pale sky. Everything looked ordinary, just rural life at its most basic. The smell of grass and earth clung to my clothes. My arms got sore from using a shovel to clear out old debris in the barn. By late afternoon, I was tired but satisfied. Nothing felt out of place in daylight. That second night, I sat up in bed again around midnight. I felt restless. My body was worn out, but my mind wouldn't settle. Then I heard the banging noise again. It was faint but unmistakable. Clang, clang, clang. It sounded like someone was striking a huge metal tank over and over. This time I got out of bed and stood at the window. It was dark, but I could see the silhouette of trees against the moonlight. I opened the window a crack, letting in a cool draft. The noise felt distant but strong, like it was echoing against the rock walls of the valley. I pulled on a jacket and quietly left my room. I went out the back door because I didn't want to wake Alex. I used a small flashlight to see the ground in front of me. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. I walked past the barn, heading toward the faint noise. With each step, I waited to hear it again, but it stopped. The night was completely still. I turned off my flashlight for a moment to listen. Nothing, not even a breeze. I stood there, feeling my heartbeat in my chest. My ears seemed almost too aware of the silence. After a minute, I gave up and went back inside. I crept into bed, but I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept drifting to that clang, clang, clang. Why did it stop whenever I got closer? The next day, I asked some neighbors about it. There's a family that lives about half a mile down the road. They're older folks who've been there forever. I brought it up casually while chatting in their front yard. They just laughed and said they hadn't heard anything. They joked that maybe I was spooked by the echoes of mining trucks. I didn't sense any malice in their laughter. It was more like they genuinely believed nothing strange was going on. Another neighbor, an older man with a scruffy beard, said nighttime noises in these mountains can be misleading. He talked about how sound travels in odd ways around here. I nodded and tried to play it off, but deep down, I felt a little uneasy. I knew I had heard something, and it had a pattern. On the third night, I was determined to stay awake. I sat in the kitchen with the lights low. Alex had gone to bed early. I sipped a bit of coffee, hoping the caffeine would keep me alert. Outside, the moon was bright, casting an almost silver glow over the valley. I kept checking the clock. Around midnight, I heard the noise again. I set my coffee cup on the table and stood, my pulse picking up speed. It was the same clanging sequence. I walked to the window by the sink and listened carefully. The beats were spaced out evenly. I counted 6 or 7 strikes, then silence. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. This time, I moved slowly around the side of the house, trying not to make noise. I noticed the sky was clear, the stars were bright, and I could see the outline of the hills and the tree line. The banging started again, maybe 50 yards away. My skin prickled. I swallowed hard and shone my flashlight toward the source. I couldn't see any metallic objects, just grass, dirt, and a few bushes. I took a few cautious steps. The clanging stopped again. My mouth felt dry. I whispered a quiet hello, but there was no answer. I stood there for a moment, breathing in and out, trying to steady my nerves. Then I headed back inside. 5 minutes later, the noise resumed as though mocking me. By the 4th day, I felt worn down. My sleep was a mess. I kept hearing the clang at night and then sitting around in the dark trying to pinpoint its origin. During the day, I was short-tempered. Alex noticed and asked if I was okay. I told him I wasn't sleeping well, but I didn't go into too much detail. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I just said the rural setting was taking some getting used to. He suggested I go for a walk around the property in the afternoon to familiarize myself with the area. Maybe if I saw every inch of land around us, I'd feel calmer. So I walked. I started near the barn, then followed a small path that led to a wooden fence. The fence separated Alex's property from an old cow pasture. That pasture sloped upward toward a rocky patch of ground, dotted with scrubby bushes and loose stones. Past that, there was a line of trees. I ventured through them and came out on a higher ridge. From there, I could see the winding road that hugged the cliff. I noticed how steep the drop was on the other side. The guardrail looked fragile. The view of the valley was impressive, but also a bit intimidating. I stayed there for a few minutes, listening for any metal sounds in broad daylight. All I heard was the wind and the occasional call of some bird. That night, the banging came right on schedule. It was almost midnight, and I was in my room, lying down, waiting for it. I turned off the lamp and just listened. Sure enough, the clanging started, that same rhythm. My heart pounded, my palms got sweaty, and I forced myself to wait to see if it would continue. It did, for a few seconds. Then silence fell again. I got up, pulled on my shoes, and went out. I walked around the side of the house, shining my flashlight into the field. No sign of anything unusual. I decided to venture out a bit farther. I followed the path behind the house, passing the barn. Every step felt loud. The grass brushed against my ankles. At one point, I accidentally kicked a metal bucket near the barn door, and the clang made me jump. My breath caught in my throat, and I stopped to listen. Nothing answered. I moved on, shining the light ahead of me. The moon was out again, so I could see a decent amount without the flashlight. I reached the fence, climbed over it carefully, and moved into the pasture. The ground was uneven, and I had to watch my footing. Rocks jutted out of the soil, and old dried weeds tangled around my boots. Then the clanging sounded again, louder this time. My chest felt tight, like my heart was trying to hammer its way out. I pointed the flashlight toward where I thought the sound was coming from. I saw only dark shapes of bushes and the fence line behind me. There was no glint of metal, no movement. I kept the light steady, stepping slowly in that direction. After a few yards, the noise stopped. The sudden quiet made me feel exposed. I spun around, checking all sides, half expecting someone to jump out. Nothing happened. I could hear my own breathing. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a minute or two, with my pulse pounding in my ears. I lowered the flashlight and headed back to the house. My legs felt shaky. When I got inside, I locked the door behind me. I felt foolish, but also frustrated. The clanging had started when I was a good distance away, then stopped the second I got close. I stared out the window for a while. I didn't hear it again that night. The next morning, I mentioned it again to Alex. He took me seriously now, because he could see I was on edge. He said we could check out the area more thoroughly during the day. We spent an hour in the afternoon walking around the pastures, the fences, the tree line, and the rocky patches. We looked for signs of old machinery, abandoned tanks, or scrap metal that might be shifting in the wind. We found nothing. No loose panels, no strange footprints, no debris that could explain the noise. Everything looked ordinary. I decided to talk to more neighbors. I drove down the road to a few farmhouses and asked if anyone else had heard unexplained metal banging at night. Everyone shook their head. A couple of them smiled politely, said sometimes the wind picks up weird echoes or trucks drive by on the main highway at night. I even mentioned how the sound seemed to come from different spots. One guy just shrugged and said sounds bounce in the valleys, so it's hard to pinpoint direction. No one acted like they were hiding anything. They just seemed genuinely unaware. That made me feel more unsettled. I knew what I heard was real, but I couldn't explain it. Another night came. I lay in bed exhausted. My head hurt from all the tension. Right on time, close to midnight, I heard the metal banging again. My stomach turned to knots. I got out of bed, feeling a chill run down my arms. I didn't even bother trying to go outside this time. I knew it would stop if I did. So I stood by the window in the dark, peering out at the faint shapes of the yard and the hills beyond. The clangs continued for a few seconds, echoing in a steady rhythm. Then silence. I stayed there a while, waiting to see if it would return. When it didn't, I crawled back into bed, but my heart kept racing. My mind spun with half-formed thoughts about what it could be. The next day, I woke up late. Alex had already started his morning routine. I dragged myself to the kitchen for a glass of water. My eyes were puffy, and I felt like my patience was wearing thin. I sat at the table, tapped my fingers on the wood, and thought about my options. I considered driving home early, but that felt like running from a mystery I couldn't solve. I also thought about installing a camera or some kind of recording device. Alex said we could try leaving his phone's camera running, aimed out the window, to see if it picked up the noise. We tried that evening, positioning the phone on a tripod by the guest room window. That night, the clanging returned once more, maybe a minute or two past midnight. I stayed in bed, eyes locked on the phone's display, which showed the dark yard. I watched the timer tick by. The microphone icon on the screen bounced with each metallic strike. Then, as usual, the noise stopped abruptly. In the morning, we played back the video. We heard the clanging clear as day, but the camera showed nothing unusual. It was just the empty yard. There was no sign of movement, no reflection of metal objects. It sounded close on the recording, but we couldn't pinpoint a source. We showed the video to a couple of neighbors and they looked puzzled, but they shrugged. One suggested it might be some underground pipes carrying the sound from a distant generator. Another said maybe it was the echo of trucks unloading metal beams at the mine. No one had a concrete answer. Days passed like this, with the same pattern repeating almost every night. I'd wait for the metallic pounding. It would happen a few times, then stop. Each time I tried to investigate, it went quiet until I walked away. Each day, Alex and I would look around for an explanation and find nothing. The neighbors stayed unconvinced. I never felt a direct threat, but my nerves were shot. My heart would race whenever midnight approached. I'd wipe sweat off my forehead, even though the air was chilly. Sometimes I found myself pacing around the living room, glancing out the windows, half expecting to see something. After a couple of weeks, I decided I'd had enough. I told Alex I was heading home. I packed my bags, threw them in my car, and gave him a handshake. He understood. As I drove away, I kept the windows down, listening to the crunch of gravel under my tires and the hum of the wind. At one point, I heard a faint metallic clang, or maybe I imagined it. I forced myself to focus on the road, especially near the cliff. I couldn't risk a slip there. When I finally left the valley behind, I felt my shoulders relax. I still can't explain what happened out there. I only know that those loud, methodical clangs kept haunting my nights, no matter how many times people insisted it was nothing. I drove up to the old summer house on a Friday afternoon. I had a bag of groceries in the back seat, a flashlight on the passenger side, and my phone charger plugged into the dashboard. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I tried to ignore it. I had convinced myself this weekend trip would be a break from everything. I remembered happier times there, barbecues with my parents, long walks on the mountain trails. But that was all years ago. I just wanted some space, a quiet place to clear my head. That was the plan. When I arrived, the air felt colder than I expected. The house was tucked away at the end of a dirt road that seemed smaller than I remembered. The trees on both sides looked taller, almost like they were bending in over the path. The sun was low and the shadows stretched out in front of my car like long stripes on the ground. I parked near the front porch. The boards on the porch looked worn and creaked when I stepped on them. The windows were dusty and the paint was peeling in some places. I opened the front door, which had a stiff lock that groaned as I turned the key. The smell of stale air hit me. Dust particles floated in the hallway, drifting through the last bit of light coming in from outside. I walked through each room, opening windows to let some fresh air in. The living room still had the old sofa and 2 armchairs. The floors were covered with a thin layer of dust. I checked the light switches, but the bulbs flickered and then went out. I remembered the rumors about weird electrical issues in the house, so I shrugged it off and decided to rely on lamps or the flashlight if needed. I set my groceries on the small kitchen table and headed back outside to grab my duffel bag. The sun was going down fast. By the time I locked my car and came back inside, the place was already getting dark. I turned on an old kerosene lamp that I found on the living room shelf. The flame gave a soft glow, which created all kinds of odd shadows on the walls. I felt a slight shiver, like something was off. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just because I was alone in an unfamiliar setting. I decided to unpack and get settled in. I went to the master bedroom upstairs. The bed had a musty comforter. I tossed it aside and spread out a blanket I had brought. I opened the curtains to let in whatever was left of the fading daylight. All I saw was a dark outline of trees outside. The wind started to pick up, making a low howling sound. The temperature dropped a few more degrees. My breath felt a bit heavy. My chest tightened again, but I kept telling myself it was just from the drive. By the time I finished settling in, it was completely dark. The lamp in the living room provided just enough light to keep me from walking into furniture, but everything else around me was pitch black. The power in the house seemed unreliable. Each time I tried the light switches, there was no consistent response. Sometimes I got a flicker, sometimes nothing. So I carried the kerosene lamp around with me. Its warm glow made the shadows on the walls shift whenever I moved. I noticed shapes in the corner of my eye, but every time I turned, there was only the normal shape of a coat rack or a chair. I sat down in the living room to eat something. I had a sandwich from the groceries I bought. As I ate, I heard a faint clicking sound in the hallway, like someone tapping a finger on a wooden door. I froze and listened. It stopped. I got up, took the lamp, and walked into the hallway. There was nothing there, just the front door, the stairway, and the dusty floorboards. I checked the lock on the door. It was secure. I stood there, breathing slowly. My heart was beating faster. I took a few steps, and the hallway floor creaked. Then I heard a different kind of creak, almost like something was responding to my movement. I held my breath. I didn't see anyone or anything, so I shrugged it off and went back to the living room. I tried to distract myself. I found an old photo album in a drawer and flipped through pictures. Most were of my parents and me smiling in the backyard. The colors had faded. After a while, I noticed the temperature dropping again. I grabbed an extra sweater from my bag and put it on. I heard the wind outside, and it was getting louder, rattling the windows. The lamp flickered, the flame wavered, and the glass around it vibrated like it might go out. I took a moment to calm myself. My breathing was shallow, and I realized I was clenching my jaw. I rubbed my neck and tried to relax. Then the lights in the kitchen blinked on, bright and sudden, and just as quickly died. It made me jump. I set the photo album aside. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The overhead bulb was still warm. I touched the switch and flipped it up and down. Nothing. I grabbed the flashlight from the countertop to see if the fuse box in the basement was accessible. I opened the basement door and a damp smell rose up. The narrow steps creaked as I went down. At the bottom, I found an old fuse box covered in cobwebs. I wiped them off with my sleeve. I tried the handle, but the panel was stuck. After a few attempts, I gave up. I decided to rely on the lamp and the flashlight until morning. I climbed back upstairs, feeling uneasy. I heard a soft scraping sound coming from behind me. It sounded like something brushing against the wall. I turned around, shining the flashlight, but the space behind me was empty. My heart pounded in my ears. I climbed the rest of the way up and slammed the door shut. I locked it. The flashlight beam shook because my hand was trembling. I put it on the kitchen table and took a few deep breaths. I wanted to clear my head, so I decided to check the upstairs rooms more thoroughly. I noticed a pull-down ladder to the attic in the hallway ceiling. I knew there might be old records or diaries up there because my parents had mentioned it before. Maybe I'd find something about the house's past, especially those rumors I had heard from locals. So I grabbed the flashlight and pulled down the attic ladder. Dust rained down. I coughed a bit and covered my mouth. Then I climbed up. The attic was cramped. The air was heavy and smelled like old paper. I saw a few trunks and boxes. I walked carefully on the wooden boards, shining my flashlight around. I opened the first trunk. It had moldy blankets and some tools. The second trunk was full of notebooks and loose sheets of yellowed paper. Some had dates going back decades. I sorted through them. One notebook mentioned repeated blackouts and weird shadows seen during storms. It said something about a presence that moves through corridors at night. Another paper had a list of times when lights went out. The notes were short, like frantic scribbles. I realized these might be journals from former residents. One entry said, "He comes when the wind picks up. Shadows follow in every corner." Another entry, "They call him the caretaker, but he's not kind. He hates intruders. He drains the power and leaves us in the dark." My stomach churned. My palms were sweating. I felt a cold breeze on my back, and I almost dropped the flashlight. I turned around and aimed the beam. The attic hatch was still open, but there was no draft. The air seemed still. Yet I felt that cold spot on my skin, like someone was breathing on my neck. I grabbed the notebooks and climbed down the ladder, almost slipping on the last rung. I shut the attic hatch. I stood there in the hallway, flipping through the pages. My heart raced. The notes were clear. People had felt a hostile presence in this house for a long time. They described the caretaker as a spirit or force that lurked around after sunset. They mentioned the caretaker getting stronger when people tried to stay overnight. They wrote about shadows moving in the corners of rooms. Some talked about hearing footsteps or tapping on walls. A few wrote that they tried to fight it but ended up leaving. Others said they stayed, but their notes ended abruptly. There were no details about what happened to them, and that made me even more uncomfortable. I took the notebooks to the living room. I sat down in the old armchair with the lamp next to me. As I read more pages, the temperature in the room seemed to drop further. My breath came out in short puffs, and I could almost see it in the dim light. The flame of the lamp grew unsteady. It was like the air was shifting around me. I heard a click near the window. Then the floorboards behind me creaked. My body tensed up. I gripped the notebook. I turned around quickly, pointing my flashlight at the spot behind me. There was nothing there, just the wall, the window, and a dusty curtain. But I felt a presence, like something was watching. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked to the window. The glass was ice cold. I pressed my hand against it. The wind outside was fierce, making the trees sway. Their branches scraped against the side of the house. I saw my reflection in the window, the flashlight beam behind me, and for a split second I thought I saw another shape next to mine. I spun around, and the lamp flickered again. I thought I saw a shadow move across the wall. It slid out of sight, disappearing into the hallway. I heard a scraping sound like something with nails or rough edges dragging along the floor. I followed the sound, holding the lamp in front of me. My throat felt tight. My hands were shaking. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I took slow steps into the hallway. I saw the stairs going up to the bedrooms. The darkness around them looked deeper than normal, like the shadows had a thickness. My breath came out fast. I shined the flashlight, trying to cut through that darkness. It felt heavy, like it was pushing back against the beam. Then, in a moment of quiet, the shape flickered on the wall, sliding up the staircase. It was like a silhouette with no source. I felt sweat on my forehead despite the cold. My legs were tense and my knees almost buckled. I forced myself to climb the stairs. Each step groaned. I heard a faint whisper, or maybe it was the wind outside. At the top, the corridor was pitch black. My flashlight dimmed for a second and I tapped it to keep it on. I looked around. Both bedroom doors were open. I stepped into the bedroom I had claimed. The bed was rumpled. I saw my bag on the chair. I noticed that the closet door was now open, even though I remembered closing it before. I walked over slowly. The inside was dark, and the flashlight showed nothing unusual. Still, my stomach felt tight, and I could taste fear in the back of my mouth. I turned toward the other bedroom. That door was half shut. I inched it open. The window in that room was covered by a curtain. I smelled mildew. A tall mirror stood against one wall. My reflection looked pale, and the light from the lamp flickered in the mirror's glass. Suddenly, I saw a faint outline behind me. It was dark and tall, but before I could react, the lamp flame sputtered and almost died. I spun around, but the shape was gone. I shone the flashlight in every corner. Nothing. I heard a slow creak near the window. I was so tense that my arms hurt from gripping the lamp and flashlight. I backed out of the room, breathing fast. I felt my heart thudding in my chest. My mind was racing. All those notes about the caretaker spirit, the local rumors, it was all crashing down on me. I had to decide whether to run out to my car and drive away or stand my ground. I felt a swirl of fear and anger. This was my family's house, and I didn't like feeling chased. I made my way downstairs to the living room again, walking faster than normal, almost running. Once there, I put the lamp on the table and let out a shaky breath. I tried to steady my thoughts. My plan was to check outside, maybe see if the caretaker was some prank or intruder. So, I went to the front door, turned the key, and pulled it open. The wind blasted in, almost blowing out the lamp. I stepped onto the porch and shone the flashlight around. The trees rustled and the cold air burned my face. I walked around the side of the house. The beams of the flashlight swept across the siding. No footprints, no signs of a person. The only sound was the wind in the trees. My boots crunched on dead leaves and gravel, I glanced up at the windows. In one, I thought I saw a shadow move, but when I aimed the light at it, the window looked empty. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I realized it was only around 9 at night, but it felt much later. I felt exhausted. The tension in my shoulders was almost painful. My eyes were dry from trying to see in the dim light. The entire house seemed alive with small noises, creaks, clicks, the occasional tapping on walls. I tried to ignore them, but every time I sat down, I felt like something was looming in the next room. I grabbed the journals again and flipped through more pages. One page said, "The caretaker demands solitude. He chases out anyone who disturbs his domain." Another said, "We tried to talk to him, but he only appeared as a shadow. When we asked him to leave, the lights died, and the doors locked." My hands were shaking and my throat was dry. I decided to face it. I stood up and called out, "I'm here for the weekend. I'm not staying long. I just wanted some peace." My voice echoed. I felt silly talking to an empty house, but something made me speak. The wind outside slowed down, like it was listening. The lamp stopped flickering for a moment. Then a thump sounded from upstairs, making me jump. I stared at the stairwell. My heart raced. I couldn't tell if it was a sign to go up there or to get out. At that point, I weighed my options. The fear was so intense that my hands trembled. My skin felt prickly. I could pack my things, hop in my car, and never come back. Or I could try to last the night, see if anything calmed down by morning. My pride told me to stay, but my body was screaming at me to leave. I took a deep breath and decided to remain. I told myself I would stay awake, at least until the first light of dawn. Then I'd see if the presence faded during the day. I moved a chair into the living room corner so I could see the hallway and the windows. I kept the flashlight and lamp within reach. I sat there, my back to the wall, listening. My eyes scanned every shadow. The tension in my neck was sharp and my hands stayed clenched in my lap. The house was quiet for a while, except for the wind outside and the occasional pop of the old wood. I kept thinking about the caretaker, wondering if it would show itself again. The adrenaline made my heart race, but after an hour, I started to feel drained. My eyelids felt heavy. Suddenly, a soft scrape came from the kitchen. I gripped the flashlight and jumped up. I walked slowly toward the sound, shining the beam around the corners. I saw the back door rattling slightly in the wind. Then it stopped. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, then turned to go back to my chair. Right then, the lamp flickered again, and I saw the shadow in the hallway. It was tall and stretched along the floor, just past the reach of my light. I froze. My body felt rigid. The shadow slid across the wall, then around the corner, heading toward the stairs. I couldn't hear footsteps, only that dragging sound again. I took one step, and the shadow disappeared. I couldn't handle more surprises. My nerves were shot. I decided I would wait out the night in that chair and leave at dawn. My stomach was in knots, and my heartbeat felt loud in my ears. Every time a board creaked, I looked around, half expecting the caretaker to appear in front of me. But it never did, at least not in a form I could fully see. Occasionally, I caught a flicker of movement on the edges of my vision. The lamp flame wavered whenever that happened, like something was passing by. Time crawled. At some point, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I had almost no signal. The battery was low. I checked the time, barely past midnight. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. My clothes were damp. I didn't dare go upstairs to change. I just sat there stiff, listening to the wind and the faint sounds in the house. In my mind, I kept thinking about the caretaker, those old notes, and the fact that everyone who sensed this presence seemed to run eventually. I could see why. By the time the first hints of morning light came through the dusty windows, I felt weak and shaky. My eyes hurt from exhaustion. I stood up, knees popping, and took the lamp with me as I went to the kitchen. I grabbed my car keys from the counter. I walked out the front door without looking back. The sunrise was faint, and the sky was still gray. My breath steamed in the cold air, and my steps felt heavy on the porch. I locked the door behind me, my hands trembling the entire time. I put the key in my jacket pocket, then got in my car, turned on the engine, and drove down that narrow dirt road. As I left, I kept checking the rearview mirror. The house disappeared behind a line of trees. My heart pounded until I reached the main road. I tried to calm down by focusing on my breathing, but the whole time I felt that shadow in the back of my mind. I don't know if I'll ever go back there. For now, it belongs to the caretaker. The shadows are his, and I have no intention of seeing them again.